I'm sorry, Ms. Brooks, but the test results confirm what we discussed. Your chances of conceiving naturally are less than 5%. Dr. Patricia Chen's words hung in the sterile air of the fertility clinic like a death sentence. Sierra Brooks sat frozen in the uncomfortable chair, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. The pamphlets about IVE and adoption scattered across the desk before her might as well have been written in a foreign language. 5%, Sierra repeated, her voice hollow. That's not zero, though, right? Dr. Chen's expression softened with the practiced compassion of someone who delivered life-altering news regularly. It's not zero, but Sierra. I want to be honest with you. Given your medical history, the endometriosis scarring and your age, even assisted reproduction would be challenging. I'm not saying impossible, but the emotional and financial investment versus the likelihood of success. Sierra nodded, unable to speak. Outside the window, she could see couples walking hand in hand, some pushing strollers, others with children skipping beside them. The life she'd always imagined felt like it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Take your time processing this. Dr. Chen continued gently. There are options we can explore, and many paths to motherhood that don't require biological connection. You have time to decide what feels right for you. But time was exactly what Sierra felt she didn't have. At 31, she'd spent the last 8 years building her relationship with Marcus, planning their future, imagining the children they'd have together. Marcus Williams, with his easy smile and ambitious dreams, who'd proposed on her 30th birthday, with promises of white picket fences and little feet running through their future home. The drive home from the clinic passed in a blur. Sierra's phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Marcus asking about the appointment, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. How do you tell the man you love that your body has betrayed not just you, but both of your dreams? Their apartment felt different when she walked through the door that evening. The spare bedroom they'd already designated as a future nursery seemed to mock her with its pale yellow walls and the rocking chair Marcus had surprised her with last Christmas. She stood in the doorway remembering how they'd debated baby names over dinner, how Marcus would sometimes catch her looking at pregnancy magazines and grin. "Babe, how did it go?" Marcus's voice called from the kitchen where the smell of his famous spaghetti carbonara filled the air. He'd clearly prepared a celebration dinner. Sierra found him at the stove, wearing the ridiculous Kiss the Cook apron her sister had given him as a joke. His dark hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit she'd always found endearing. When he turned and saw her expression, his hopeful smile faltered. "Sierra, what did Dr. Chen say?" The words came out mechanical, detached, as if she were reading from a script. She explained the diagnosis, the statistics, the grim reality of their situation. Marcus listened in silence, the wooden spoon in his hand forgotten, as sauce began to bubble and pop on the stove. "But there are other options," she continued quickly, desperate to fill the growing silence. "IVF, adoption, surrogacy. We can still have a family, Marcus. It just might look different than we planned." Marcus turned off the burner and set down the spoon with deliberate care. When he looked at her, something had shifted in his eyes, something that made Sierra's stomach drop with dread. "Sierra, He ran his hands through his hair, that familiar gesture now seeming anxious rather than endearing. "I need to think about this. This changes everything." "What do you mean, everything?" Sierra's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. "I'm still me. We're still us. The only thing that's changed is how we'll build our family." But Marcus was already shaking his head. "I signed up for a family, Sierra. A real family. Kids of our own. I've been planning for this since we got together. My whole life is built around that expectation." The words hit Sierra like physical blows. Kids of our own. What does that even mean? Adopted children wouldn't be our own. Children born through IVF wouldn't count. "You know that's not what I meant." But his tone suggested maybe it was exactly what he meant. I never considered this possibility. I need time to process. That night, Marcus slept in the spare bedroom. Sierra lay alone in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of her dreams cracking apart piece by piece. She thought about all the conversations they'd had about their future children, how Marcus would talk about teaching his son to throw a baseball or walking his daughter down the aisle. Had any of that love been conditional on those children sharing his DNA? 3 days later, Marcus came home from work with the expression Sierra had been dreading. She was curled on the couch with a cup of tea, watching mindless television, and trying not to think about the adoption websites bookmarked on her laptop. "Sierra, we need to talk." She muted the TV and turned to face him, already knowing what was coming, but hoping desperately that she was wrong. Marcus sat on the edge of the coffee table, his hands clasped between his knees. "I've been thinking about what you said about the different options for having a family, and I've realized something about myself that I'm not proud of." Sierra's heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain still. "I can't do it." Marcus continued, his voice strained. "I can't pretend that adoption or IVF or surrogacy would feel the same to me as having biological children. I know that makes me shallow, maybe even a terrible person, but I have to be honest. This isn't the future I want." "So what are you saying?" Sierra's voice came out as a whisper. "I'm saying I think we need to end this before we both get hurt worse than we already are. You deserve someone who can love you and whatever family you create unconditionally. And He paused, swallowing hard. "I need to find someone whose dreams align with mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Sierra felt something inside her chest shatter, the sound echoing in her ears like breaking glass. When she finally found her voice, it was eerily calm. "Get out. Sierra, please, let's talk about this. Get out!" The words exploded from her with such force that Marcus actually flinched. "Get out of my apartment, get your things, and get out of my life. If you can throw away 8 years over something I can't control, then you're right. You're not the man I thought you were." Marcus left that night, taking his clothes and his promises and his conditional love with him. Sierra spent the next week calling in sick to work, eating ice cream for breakfast, and crying until she felt completely empty. But as the days passed, something else began to grow in the space Marcus's abandonment had carved out. Anger, yes, but also a fierce determination. Sierra had always been a fighter. She'd built her non-profit organization Arts for Every Child from nothing more than a dream and a borrowed laptop. She'd secured funding, hired staff, and changed the lives of hundreds of underprivileged kids who'd never had access to music, art, or drama programs. If Marcus couldn't see past his narrow definition of family, that was his loss. Sierra would build the life she wanted with or without him, with or without biological children. 2 years later, Sierra stood in the main classroom of her non-profit, watching a group of 8-year-olds work on a collaborative mural. The walls around them were covered with artwork from dozens of children who'd passed through the program, their creativity blooming under the guidance of professional artists and teachers Sierra had fought to bring into their community. "Miss Sierra," a small voice called out. "Look what I painted Jeremiah." A shy boy who'd barely spoken when he first arrived 6 months ago held up a canvas covered in bold strokes of blue and yellow. His smile was so wide and proud that Sierra felt her chest tighten with emotion. "It's beautiful, Jeremiah. Tell me about it." "It's my family," he said, pointing to stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. "That's my mom and my grandma and my little sister. And that's me. We're at the park having a picnic." Sierra knelt down to his level, studying the painting with genuine interest. "I love how happy everyone looks. You can tell they love each other very much." Jeremiah nodded enthusiastically. My mum says family is people who take care of each other and make you feel safe. She says it doesn't matter if you're born into it or if you choose it. The simple wisdom of a child's perspective hit Sierra with unexpected force. This little boy who'd been through more instability in his 8 years than most adults experienced in a lifetime understood something Marcus never could. "Your mom sounds very smart," Sierra said, ruffling his hair. As the afternoon wound down and parents began arriving to pick up their children, Sierra found herself standing at the window watching the reunions. Maria Santos hugging her twin daughters after a long day of work. Mr. Johnson high-fiving his son and asking about the day's projects. Mrs. Kim helping her daughter pack up her art supplies with infinite patience. These families came in all shapes and sizes. Single parents, grandparents, raising grandchildren, older siblings, stepping in as guardians. Some shared DNA, others were bound by choice and circumstance and love. But they were all real families, complete in their own ways. Sierra's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jane. "Dinner tonight, I have someone I want you to meet." Sierra groaned inwardly. Jane had been trying to set her up for months, insisting that 2 years was long enough to wallow and that Sierra needed to get back out there. The well-meaning but persistent matchmaking attempts had become a running joke between them. "Jane, we've talked about this. I'm not ready. That's exactly why you need to meet Dylan. He's not ready either." Perfect match. Despite herself, Sierra found herself smiling. Jane's logic was often questionable, but her heart was always in the right place. "Fine. But if this is another disaster, I'm blocking your number. Trust me on this one. Dylan Grant is special, and he has the kindest eyes I've ever seen." As Sierra locked up the art center and headed home to her quiet apartment, she tried to imagine what her life might look like in 5 years. Would she still be alone, pouring all her maternal energy into other people's children? The thought wasn't entirely depressing anymore. She'd found purpose and joy in her work, built meaningful relationships, created a life that felt full, even if it wasn't the life she'd originally planned. But sometimes in quiet moments like this, she still felt the echo of that old longing. Not for Marcus specifically, but for partnership, for someone to share the weight and wonder of daily life. Someone who could see all the different ways family could be built and love her, not despite her limitations, but including them. Maybe Jane was right. Maybe it was time to try again. Dylan Grant stood in the doorway of his apartment, staring at the note his wife had left on the kitchen counter. The paper trembled in his hands as he read the words that would change everything. "I can't do this anymore. The girls deserve better than a mother who resents them. Don't look for me." 3 cribs sat in the nursery down the hall, each containing a 6-month-old baby girl. Aria Nova and Luna, his daughters, his entire world, now his sole responsibility. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the soft sounds of sleeping babies who didn't yet know their mother was gone. Melissa Hart had never wanted children. She'd been honest about that from the beginning of their relationship. Her dreams focused entirely on her acting career, but birth control had failed, and suddenly she was pregnant with triplets. Dylan remembered the moment they'd found out at the ultrasound, how his heart had exploded with joy, while Melissa's face had gone pale with terror. "We'll make it work," he'd promised, holding her hand in that darkened ultrasound room. "I'll support your career. We'll hire help. We can do this together." For 6 months they'd tried. Melissa had taken a leave from auditions, thrown herself into preparing for motherhood, with the same intensity she brought to memorizing lines. She'd read every parenting book, assembled nursery furniture, even practiced changing diapers on baby dolls. But Dylan had seen the panic in her eyes growing stronger each day, the way she'd flinch when the babies cried, how she'd hand them off to him the moment he walked through the door. 3 days ago she'd gotten a call about an audition for a pilot that could launch her career. The same day all 3 girls had come down with their first cold. Dylan had been stuck at work dealing with a server crisis, and Melissa had been alone with 3 miserable, screaming babies for 12 hours. He'd come home to find her sitting on the bathroom floor, still in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "I can't," she'd whispered. "I love them, but I can't be what they need. Every time they cry, I feel like I'm failing. Every time I look at them, I see my dreams disappearing." Dylan had tried to comfort her, promised they'd figure it out, that he'd take time off work, that they'd hire more help. But in his heart, he'd known it was too late. Melissa had already checked out emotionally, and forcing her to stay would only hurt everyone more. Now she was gone, and Dylan was alone with 3 tiny humans who depended on him for everything. The first cry came from Luna's room. Then Nova joined in, followed by Aria. Dylan dropped the note and rushed to the nursery, his hands shaking as he tried to figure out how to comfort 3 babies at once. He picked up Luna first, her tiny body hot with fever, then somehow managed to lift Nova with his other arm. Aria continued wailing from her crib, her face red with exhaustion and confusion. "It's okay, girls," Dylan whispered, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. "Daddy's here. I'm here." But as he stood there holding 2 babies, while a third screamed for attention he couldn't give, Dylan felt the first wave of true panic. How was he supposed to do this? How could one person be enough for 3 children? Who needed constant care, that first week passed in a haze of sleepless nights and overwhelming responsibility. Dylan learned to prop bottles while changing diapers, to sleep in 15-minute increments, to identify each baby's different cries. He called in sick to work 3 times, burned through his vacation days, and started every morning with the bone-deep exhaustion of someone running a marathon without a finish line. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman next door, noticed his struggles and started appearing at his door with casseroles and offers to hold a baby while he showered. Raising triplets alone, she'd mutter, shaking her grey head. That woman should be ashamed of herself. Dylan never spoke badly about Melissa in front of Mrs. Patterson or anyone else. Whatever her reasons for leaving the girls, deserved to think well of their mother. But privately, in the dark hours of early morning when he was feeding 3 bottles simultaneously and wondering how he'd function at work the next day, Dylan felt the first edges of resentment creeping in. By the time the girls turned 2, Dylan had developed a routine that worked barely. He'd wake at 5 a.m., get himself ready for work, then begin the complex choreography of preparing 3 toddlers for daycare. Breakfast was a rotation of high chairs, sippy cups, and small rebellions over what constituted acceptable food. Getting them dressed required the patience of a saint and the organizational skills of a military commander. The daycare workers at Little Stars Academy were angels who helped him navigate potty training tantrums and the specific needs of 3 distinct personalities emerging from identical DNA. Aria was the thoughtful one, always watching and analyzing before acting. Nova was the scientist taking apart every toy to see how it worked. Luna was the collector drawn to anything small and beautiful she could carry in her pockets. But despite the routine, despite the help, despite his growing competence as a single parent, Dylan felt himself drowning in isolation. Other parents at daycare pickup seemed to exist in pairs, dividing the labor of child-rearing in ways that looked effortless. They made playdates and attended birthday parties, while Dylan scheduled his life around nap times and the logistics of transporting 3 children anywhere. Work became his escape and his curse. As a senior systems analyst at TechFlow Solutions, Dylan was responsible for maintaining the computer networks that kept dozens of businesses running smoothly. His colleagues respected his expertise, but they also knew he had to leave precisely at 5 p.m. every day, couldn't attend after-hours meetings, and sometimes had to work from home when the girls were sick. Dylan's breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when the girls were 2.5. He'd had a particularly brutal day at work dealing with a network failure that had taken 12 hours to resolve. He'd missed pickup at daycare, forcing Mrs. Patterson to collect the girls and bring them home. When he finally walked through his apartment door at 8 p.m., exhausted and defeated, he found his daughters already in their pajamas, having eaten dinner and been bathed by his neighbor, Daddy. All three girls rushed him, their faces bright with joy despite his absence. "Where were you?" Arya asked, her small hands framing his face. "We waited and waited." The guilt hit Dylan like a physical blow. These beautiful, innocent children had been waiting for him while he'd been saving someone else's business, choosing professional responsibility over being present for his daughters. Mrs. Patterson watched from the kitchen doorway, her expression understanding but concerned. "Thank you, Dylan," said to her, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you today." "Those servers will be there tomorrow," Dylan, Mrs. Patterson said gently. "These little ones won't be little forever." After she left, Dylan sat on his living room floor with his daughters crawling all over him, their chatter filling the apartment with life and love. But underneath their joy, he sensed something else. A need he couldn't fill alone, a longing for the kind of family completeness he'd never experienced himself. That night, after the girls were asleep, Dylan found himself in the bathroom mirror, staring at a man who looked older than his 30 years. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hairline showed the stress of constant worry, and his shoulders carried a weight that seemed to grow heavier each day. The thought that had been lurking in the back of his mind for months finally surfaced. What if he wasn't enough? What if his love, his devotion, his sacrifice weren't sufficient to give his daughters the life they deserved? Other children had mothers who braided their hair and painted their nails, who could attend school events without having to juggle work schedules, who could offer the unique comfort that only a mother's love provided. Dylan slumped onto the toilet seat, his head in his hands, and for the first time since Melissa left, he let himself truly break down. The sobs came from somewhere deep and raw, 3 years of suppressed grief and overwhelming responsibility, pouring out in ugly, silent heaves that shook his entire body. He cried for the marriage that had failed before it really began. He cried for Melissa, trapped by circumstances she'd never wanted. He cried for his daughters who would grow up without their mother through no fault of their own. And he cried for himself, for the loneliness that ate at him during quiet moments, for the dreams he'd put aside, for the fear that he was failing the most important job of his life. When the tears finally stopped, Dylan splashed cold water on his face and made a decision. He would be enough. Whatever it took, however hard he had to work, however much of himself he had to sacrifice, he would be everything his daughters needed. He wouldn't let them feel the absence of their mother as a deficit in their lives. He would love them enough for 2 parents. 5 years later, Dylan stood in his kitchen on a Thursday morning, orchestrating the familiar chaos of getting 3 7-year-olds ready for school. Luna had lost her favorite rock collection and was refusing to leave without it. Nova had disassembled her alarm clock during the night and was trying to reassemble it at the breakfast table. Arya was reading a book about space exploration, completely absorbed and oblivious to the scrambled eggs growing cold on her plate. "Girls, we need to move." Dylan called flipping pancakes that were already slightly burned around the edges. "The bus comes in 15 minutes. Daddy, I think I broke time," Nova announced, holding up pieces of her clock. The numbers fell out. "Time doesn't break, silly," Arya said, without looking up from her book. "It's not a physical object. It's a dimension." "Can you fix dimensions?" Daddy Luna asked finally, locating her rock collection in yesterday's backpack. Dylan smiled despite the morning stress. These conversations, these moments of pure childhood wonder, were what made every sleepless night and every sacrifice worthwhile. His daughters were brilliant, curious, loving children who filled his life with purpose and joy. But as he packed their lunches and checked backpacks and reminded them about their homework, Dylan caught sight of himself in the hall mirror. At 33, he looked exhausted. The lines around his eyes spoke of years of single parenting, late nights, and constant worry. His social life consisted of school events and trips to the park. His last real conversation with another adult had been with Mrs. Patterson about Luna's cold. Dylan's phone buzzed with a text from his friend Jane, a colleague from his previous job, who'd stayed in touch despite his retreat from their social circle. Dylan, I have someone I want you to meet. She's perfect for you. Dylan groaned internally. Jane had been trying to set him up for months, insisting that 3 years was long enough to focus only on the girls, and that he deserved happiness too. Her matchmaking attempts had become increasingly persistent, though Dylan had managed to avoid most of them with excuses about work and parenting responsibilities. Jane, you know I don't have time for dating. That's exactly why you need this. Sierra Brooks. She runs a non-profit for kids. She's beautiful, she's kind, and she's been single for 2 years. You have so much in common. Dylan's phone rang before he could respond to the text. Jane's voice filled the kitchen, making him aware that his daughters were listening to every word. Dylan Grant, if you hang up on me, I'm coming over there and setting you up on this date in person. Jane. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., Rosewood Cafe. I've already arranged it with Sierra. She's expecting you. I can't just abandon the girls for a date with a stranger, Mrs. Patterson already said she'd watch them. I called her first because I knew you'd try to use them as an excuse. Dylan looked at his daughters, who had stopped their morning activities, to stare at him with wide, curious eyes. Daddy's going on a date, Arya whispered to her sisters. What's a date? Luna whispered back. It's when grown-ups have dinner together and try to fall in love. Nova explained, with the confidence of a 7-year-old who'd seen too many Disney movies. Girls, eat your breakfast, Dylan said, his ears burning with embarrassment. But that evening, as he tucked them into bed and read their nightly story, Dylan found himself thinking about Jane's proposition. When was the last time he'd had a conversation with another adult that didn't revolve around his daughters or his work? When was the last time he'd done something purely for himself? Daddy. Arya's sleepy voice interrupted his thoughts. Are you lonely? The question hit Dylan like a punch to the stomach. He looked at his daughter's earnest face, her eyes so much like his own, and realized she'd been watching him more closely than he'd thought. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Sometimes when you think we're not looking, you get a sad face. Nova chimed in from her bed. Like you're missing something, Luna added quietly. Dylan's throat tightened. He'd thought he'd been hiding his loneliness so well, focusing all his energy on being present and positive for his daughters. But children, he was learning, saw everything. I have you 3, he said finally. That's all I need. But even as he said the words, Dylan knew they weren't entirely true. He loved his daughters more than life itself, but that didn't erase the human need for adult companionship, for partnership, for someone to share the weight and wonder of daily life. Maybe Jane was right. Maybe it was time to try. The next morning brought a crisis that would change everything. Dylan was in the middle of a crucial presentation at work when his phone started buzzing incessantly. The TechFlow server farm was experiencing a cascade failure that threatened to wipe out client data and cost the company millions in damages. I need you here now, his supervisor Marcus said, his voice tight with panic. Everything's crashing, and you're the only one who understands this network architecture well enough to fix it. Dylan looked at his watch, 4 p.m. He was supposed to meet Sierra at 7, but a system failure of this magnitude could take hours to resolve. His first instinct was to cancel the date to stay and fix the crisis, to choose professional responsibility over personal possibility. But then he thought about his daughter's observations, about the sadness they'd seen in his face, about the loneliness that had become such a constant companion, he'd almost stopped noticing it. "I'll fix it," he told Marcus. "But I have somewhere I need to be tonight." As Dylan dove into lines of code and network diagnostics wrestling with a crisis that demanded every bit of his expertise, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would mark a turning point in more than just TechFlow's technical infrastructure. "He's doing that thing again," Arya whispered to her sisters from their hiding spot on the staircase. Through the banister rails, the 3 7-year-olds watched their father pace the living room while talking on his phone. Dylan's free hand ran through his hair repeatedly, a nervous habit they'd learned to recognize as a sign of serious daddy anxiety. "The fixing his tie thing," Nova whispered back, adjusting her position on the wooden step. "And the checking himself in the mirror thing," Luna added, clutching her favorite smooth rock for comfort. This was different from their father's usual phone calls about work or school schedules. Dylan had showered for the second time that day, put on his good shirt, the blue one that brought out his eyes, and had been practicing what looked like conversation in the bathroom mirror for 20 minutes. "I understand," Jane Dylan was saying into the phone, his voice carrying the forced calm he used when he was trying not to panic. "It's just that I haven't done this ever, really. Not as a single father." The girls exchanged meaningful glances. They'd heard that name before Jane, from Daddy's old work, the one who sometimes sent them birthday cards and called to check on their father. "Yes, I know, Sierra sounds wonderful," Dylan continued, stopping his pacing to stare at himself in the hallway mirror again. "A non-profit for kids loves art has been hurt before. I get why you think we'd be compatible." "It's not about her. It's about Dylan." Paused, listening to whatever Jane was saying, and his shoulders relaxed slightly. "You're right. The girls do ask about why I don't have friends like other parents. And yes, Mrs. Patterson has mentioned that I seem lonely." He laughed, but it sounded tired. "Apparently I'm not as good at hiding things as I thought." Arya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She'd been noticing Daddy's sadness for months now, the way he'd get quiet after they went to bed, how he never did anything fun just for himself. When other kids talked about their parents going out together or having friends over, Arya realized their family was different in more ways than just having one parent. Okay, I'll do it," Dylan said finally. "Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., Rosewood Cafe. But Jane, if this goes badly, I'm never speaking to you again." He hung up the phone and leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. From their perch on the stairs, the girls could see the mixture of excitement and terror on his face. "What's Rosewood Cafe?" Luna whispered. "It's where people go for dates," Nova explained with the authority of someone who'd overheard Mrs. Patterson talking about her neighbor's granddaughter. "What's a date again?" Luna asked. Arya, as the oldest by 3 minutes, and therefore the family expert on grown-up behavior, settled in to explain. "It's when 2 people who might want to love each other have dinner together to see if they're compatible. Like when animals choose mates." Nova asked, her scientific mind making connections. "Sort of, but with less sniffing," Arya replied. The girls watched their father disappear into the kitchen, probably to stress cook his way through their entire pantry. They'd learned to recognize this pattern whenever Dylan felt overwhelmed. He channeled his nervous energy into elaborate meal preparation. "Emergency sister meeting," Arya announced quietly, and the 3 of them crept up to their shared bedroom. Their room was a perfect representation of their individual personalities within their shared space. Arya's side was organized with books stacked by size, and her space posters arranged in planetary order. Nova's area looked like a workshop explosion with various mechanical toys in different stages of disassembly. Luna's corner was decorated with smooth rocks arranged in careful patterns, each one a treasure from their daily walks. The girls arranged themselves in a triangle on Arya's bed, their faces serious with the gravity of what they'd overheard. "Daddy's scared," Luna said simply. "Of course he's scared," Nova replied. "He hasn't been on a date since before we were born. That's like 7.5 years of no practice." Arya nodded thoughtfully. And he's worried about us. I heard him tell Mrs. Patterson last week that he didn't know how to introduce someone new into our lives without confusing us. That's silly, Luna said, unconsciously mimicking their father's gesture of running her hand through her hair. We're not confused. We're smart. Super smart. Nova agreed. Smart enough to know that Daddy needs help. The three girls sat in contemplative silence for a moment, the weight of their shared realization settling around them. Their father, who took care of everything for everyone, needed someone to take care of him. But he was too scared and too focused on protecting them to do anything about it. What if Daddy doesn't go? Arya asked. What if he gets scared and cancels? He's been cancelling things for himself for years, Nova said, with the devastating clarity that only children possess. Remember when Mrs. Patterson invited him to her book club, and when Mr. Johnson asked him to play poker with the neighborhood dads? He always says he needs to stay home with us, Luna added. But we'd be okay with Mrs. Patterson for a few hours. Arya stood up suddenly, her face bright with inspiration. What if we made sure he couldn't cancel? How her sisters asked in unison. What if we went to the date first? Nova and Luna stared at her as if she'd suggested flying to the moon. Think about it. Arya continued, beginning to pace in a miniature version of their father's nervous walking. If we're already there when Daddy arrives, he can't leave without being rude. And we can make sure the lady knows that Daddy is good and kind and worth waiting for. But how would we get there? Nova asked, her practical mind immediately identifying the logistical challenges. Rachel Luna exclaimed, referring to their beloved nanny, who watched them during the summer, and whenever Dylan had to work late. We tell Rachel that Daddy said we could go to Rosewood Cafe. Arya said, her plan crystallizing with each word. We don't exactly lie. We just present the information in a way that makes her think it's already approved. Nova looked skeptical. That's still kind of lying. It's strategic truth management, Arya corrected, using a phrase she'd heard their father use when explaining why they couldn't tell Mrs. Patterson that her new haircut looked like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket. What if Daddy gets really mad? Luna asked, her gentle nature making her worry about consequences. Daddy never stays mad at us for long, Arya reminded them, especially if our hearts were in the right place. And our hearts are definitely in the right place, Nova agreed. We love Daddy. We want him to be happy. So we're really doing this? Luna asked, excitement beginning to replace her anxiety. We're really doing this, Arya confirmed. Operation Make Daddy Happy is officially a go. The girls spent the next hour planning every detail with the thoroughness of seasoned strategists. They would ask Rachel to take them out for dinner as a special treat. They would suggest Rosewood Cafe because they'd heard it had good food. They would arrive early enough to scope out the location and identify the lady named Sierra. What if we can't tell which one is Sierra? Nova asked. Jane said she's beautiful and kind, Arya replied. And she'll probably be sitting alone checking her phone and looking nervous. Like Daddy does when he's waiting for parent-teacher conferences, Luna added. Exactly. And once we find her, we introduce ourselves and explain that Daddy is coming, but he might be a little late. What if she doesn't like us? Nova worried. Everyone likes us, Arya said with the confidence of a child who'd never encountered an adult who wasn't charmed by their earnest enthusiasm. We're adorable and polite, and we have excellent manners. Plus, if she doesn't like us, then she doesn't deserve Daddy anyway, Luna added with surprising fierceness. As they refined their plan, the girls found themselves growing more excited about the adventure and the possibility of what it might bring. They'd watched other families at school, seen how their friends' parents interacted, noticed the way some kids had two adults who both came to school plays and helped with homework, and shared the responsibilities of family life. They loved their father with every fiber of their beings, but they were also old enough to recognize that he carried a heavy load alone. Mrs. Patterson helped when she could, and Rachel was wonderful during her scheduled hours, but neither of them was a permanent part of their family unit. "What if Sierra becomes our mom?" Luna asked softly. The question hung in the air, heavy with hope and possibility, and the kind of magical thinking that only children could embrace without reservation. "Then we'd be the luckiest family ever," Arya said, "because Daddy would be happy and we'd have someone else who loved us. And maybe someone who's better at doing hair than Daddy is," Nova added, practically touching her slightly lopsided ponytail. "Daddy tries his best with hair," Luna defended loyally. "He does try his best." Arya agreed. "But YouTube tutorials can only teach you so much." The next evening, the girls put their plan into motion with the precision of a military operation. When Rachel arrived for her scheduled evening shift, they greeted her with bright smiles and an enthusiastic request for dinner out. "Please, Rachel," Luna said, clasping her hands together in the universal gesture of childhood pleading. "We've been so good all week, and we never get to go to restaurants without Daddy having to watch us eat instead of enjoying his own food." Rachel, who was 22 and still charmed by their earnest manipulation, found herself agreeing before she'd fully thought through the implications. "I suppose we could go somewhere nearby," she said, "but I should probably check with your dad first." "He's still at work," Arya said quickly, which was technically true since Dylan had texted that the server crisis was taking longer than expected. "But he said we could do something fun tonight since he might be late." Also technically true in the girls' interpretation of strategic fact presentation. "Where did you want to go?" Rachel asked, already reaching for her keys. "There's this cafe called Rosewood that's supposed to have really good food," Nova said innocently. "We've heard great things about it." And so, at 6:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening, 3 7-year-old girls found themselves walking into Rosewood Cafe with their unsuspecting nanny, their hearts pounding with excitement and determination and the absolute certainty that they were about to change their family's life forever. The cafe was exactly as they'd imagined: warm lighting, comfortable seating, the kind of place where grown-ups went to have important conversations. Several people sat alone at various tables, checking phones or reading books while they waited for dinner companions. "There," Arya whispered to her sisters, nodding toward a woman sitting by the window. Sierra Brooks sat at a corner table, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders, her expression a mixture of nervousness and hope as she checked her phone for messages from her date. She was beautiful, just as Jane had described, but more than that, she had kind eyes and gentle hands and the sort of presence that made the girls instinctively trust her. "That's her," Nova agreed. "That has to be Sierra. She looks nice," Luna said softly. Rachel was busy talking to the hostess about getting a table for 4, giving the girls the perfect opportunity to execute the next phase of their plan. Rachel Arya called out sweetly, "We see someone we know. Can we go say hello?" Before Rachel could respond, the 3 girls were already making their way across the cafe, their hands clasped together for mutual support, their faces bright with nervous excitement and absolute determination to give their father the happiness he deserved, but was too scared to reach for himself. "Excuse me, are you Sierra?" The voice was small, confident, and completely unexpected. Sierra Brooks looked up from her phone, her polite smile already forming, until she realized she wasn't looking at a waiter. She was looking at 3 identical little girls, no older than 7, standing at her table like they'd just walked off the set of a storybook. Blonde curls caught the cafe's warm lighting, matching red sweaters made them look like a coordinated set, and wide, hopeful eyes studied Sierra with the intense curiosity that only children possessed. They stood in a perfect line, hands clasped behind their backs, posture impeccable, despite the mischief twinkling in their expressions. "We're here for our daddy," the middle girl announced, as if that explained everything, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone children used when stating obvious truths. He's really, really sorry he's late. There was a work emergency. That's why he isn't here yet. Sierra blinked once, twice, 3 times. The words made sense individually, but strung together they created a reality she wasn't prepared for. She'd been sitting at Rosewood Cafe for 20 minutes nursing a cup of coffee and trying to calm her first date nerves while waiting for Dylan Grant, the mysterious man Jane had insisted possessed the kindest eyes and deserved someone special. Jane had painted Dylan as a devoted single father, but somehow in all her enthusiastic descriptions, she'd forgotten to mention that his children were triplets. More importantly, she'd definitely failed to mention that these triplets were apparently the kind of children who took initiative in their father's romantic life. "I'm sorry," Sierra said slowly, setting down her phone. "Did you say your daddy sent you?" The first girl nodded enthusiastically, her curls bouncing with the motion. "Well, not exactly sent us. He doesn't know we're here yet." Her honesty was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd never learned that some truths might be problematic. "But he's coming." The third girl chimed in, her voice soft but certain. "We promise he's coming. We just wanted to meet you first." "Can we sit with you?" the middle girl asked, already reaching for the back of an empty chair. "We've been waiting to meet you all week." Sierra glanced around the cafe, suddenly aware that their conversation was drawing amused attention from other patrons. An elderly couple at a nearby table was watching with barely concealed delight, and she caught the barista behind the counter, stretching to get a better view of the unusual scene unfolding in the corner. This wasn't how blind dates were supposed to go. There was supposed to be awkward small talk, careful assessment of compatibility, the gradual revelation of personal information. There wasn't supposed to be a welcoming committee of 7-year-olds with their father's eyes and an obvious agenda. But as Sierra looked at these 3 little girls, brave enough to approach a stranger, confident enough to advocate for their father, loving enough to orchestrate what was clearly an elaborate plan, she felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. "Okay," she said, gesturing to the empty chairs around her table. "I think you'd better explain." The triplets climbed into the seats across from her with the synchronized efficiency that spoke of years of shared experiences. They arranged themselves like a small tribunal, sitting up straight with their hands folded, their expressions serious despite the underlying excitement radiating from their small bodies. "I'm Aria," the first girl announced, extending a tiny hand across the table with the formality of a seasoned businesswoman. "This is Nova. And that's Luna. We're 7 years old." 7 3/4 Nova corrected with scientific precision. "Which is practically 8. And we're really good at keeping secrets," Luna added in a conspiratorial whisper. "Except this one. Daddy's going to find out about this one pretty soon." Despite the surreal nature of the situation, Sierra found herself laughing. A real, surprised laugh that broke through the confusion and nervousness that had been building since Jane first mentioned this blind date. These children were disarming in a way she hadn't expected, honest, earnest, clearly beloved, and apparently operating under the belief that their father needed romantic intervention. "All right, ladies," Sierra said, settling back in her chair with genuine curiosity. "Start from the beginning. How did you know I'd be here?" Aria leaned forward, her expression shifting to serious mode. "We heard Daddy talking on the phone with Aunt Jane. He said he was going to meet someone named Sierra at Rosewood Cafe at 7 Huzerbrosel." He sounded nervous. Really nervous. Nova emphasized, her eyes wide for dramatic effect. He kept fixing his tie in the bathroom mirror. He must have adjusted it like 20 times. Luna nodded sagely, adding her own observation. "And he never fixes his tie. Ever. That's how we knew this was important." Sierra felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. The image of a nervous father preparing for his first date in years, worried enough to repeatedly check his appearance, careful enough to want to make a good impression. It was endearing in a way that made her temporarily forget her own anxieties. "So you decided to come here instead of him?" Sierra asked. "Not instead of him?" Nova corrected quickly. "Before him. He had to stay at work because something broke and he had to fix it. But we didn't want you to think he forgot about you because he didn't forget. He would never forget something this important. He was so excited this morning." Arya continued her voice, taking on the tone children used when sharing particularly significant intelligence. He even burned the pancakes because he wasn't paying attention to the stove. He was too busy thinking about tonight. "He always burns pancakes," Luna added matter-of-factly. "But today was worse. Like really bad. Mrs. Patterson had to open the windows to get the smoke out." Sierra pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to suppress another laugh. These children were painting a picture of their father that was both heartwarming and hilarious, a competent man reduced to breakfast disasters by the prospect of a dinner date. "So you convinced your nanny to bring you here?" Sierra asked, glancing around the cafe until she spotted a young woman at the hostess station who was clearly trying to figure out where her charges had disappeared to. The triplets exchanged a look that contained the kind of wordless communication Sierra had heard about, but never witnessed firsthand. It was like watching a silent conversation unfold through facial expressions and subtle gestures. "We didn't exactly convince her," Arya said carefully, her diplomatic phrasing suggesting a future in politics. "We may have told her that Daddy said it was okay to go out for dinner, which he will say was okay." Nova added quickly, her scientific mind apparently comfortable with theoretical probability. "Once he knows it worked." Once what worked, Sierra asked, though she was beginning to understand the scope of what these three remarkable children had orchestrated. Luna smiled, then a gap-toothed grin full of mischief and hope that transformed her entire face. "Our plan to make sure Daddy doesn't give up on being happy." The words hit Sierra with unexpected force. Here were 3 7-year-olds who had not only recognized their father's loneliness, but had taken active steps to address it. They hadn't simply accepted that their family was complete as it was, they'd seen their father's hidden sadness and decided to do something about it. Sierra leaned back in her chair, studying the 3 earnest faces across from her. They were watching her with an intensity that was both amusing and touching, like they were waiting for her verdict on something far more important than a first date. Your daddy, Sierra, began slowly choosing her words carefully. "Does he know you're here right now?" 3 blonde heads shook in perfect unison. Is he going to be upset when he finds out Arya considered this question with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence? Maybe a little bit upset, but not for very long. Daddy doesn't stay mad at us, especially when our hearts are in the right place. He just gets this look. Nova continued demonstrating by furrowing her small brow in what was clearly an imitation of paternal disappointment. The "I love you, but please don't do that again, look." And then he hugs us. Luna finished, her voice soft with absolute certainty in her father's love. Sierra felt warmth spread through her chest as she listened to these children describe their father. A man who didn't stay angry, who led with love instead of punishment, who had raised 3 confident, articulate, clearly adored daughters on his own. Jane hadn't mentioned the single-parent aspect, but sitting here with Dylan's children, Sierra was beginning to understand why. Jane knew Sierra had built walls around her heart after Marcus's abandonment. She knew Sierra had convinced herself that the last thing she wanted was to step into someone else's complicated life, to take on the responsibilities and potential heartbreak that came with loving someone else's children. But walls Sierra was discovering had a hard time standing up to 7-year-olds in matching sweaters who looked at the world with such hope and determination. "Can I ask you something?" Sierra said, gently leaning forward to meet them at eye level. "Anything," Arya responded immediately. "Why is this so important to you?" Why go through all this trouble to help your daddy meet someone? The question seemed to unlock something in the girls, and their carefully maintained composure began to soften. Nova looked down at her hands. Arya's eyes grew serious, and Luna's lower lip trembled slightly before she pressed them together in a thin line. It was Nova who spoke first, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. Because Daddy's been sad for a really long time. He doesn't think we notice, Arya added her words, carrying the weight of careful observation. But we do notice. We see everything. Luna nodded, her small hands clasping together on the table. He smiles when he's with us, and we know he loves us more than anything in the whole world. But when he thinks we're not looking, he looks lonely, Arya finished softly. Sierra's throat tightened as she watched these children articulate something many adults would struggle to express. They had seen past their father's devoted parenting to the man underneath the person who had been carrying the weight of single parenthood while sacrificing his own emotional needs for theirs. He takes care of everything for us. Nova continued, her voice growing stronger. He makes breakfast even when he burns it. He helps with our homework, even when it's really hard math that makes him frustrated. He reads us bedtime stories with all the different voices, even when he's tired from work. He comes to every school play and every parent-teacher conference, Arya added. He braids our hair for picture day, even though he's not very good at it yet. He never misses anything important to us. But he never does anything just for himself, Luna said quietly. Her observation delivered with the devastating clarity that only children possessed. He never goes anywhere fun or talks to other grown-ups or does any of the things that other parents do. Sierra found herself leaning forward, drawn into their earnest concern for their father's well-being. Did he tell you he was lonely? Daddy would never tell us that, Arya said with absolute certainty. He doesn't want us to worry about him, but Mrs. Patterson says he's scared. Scared of what Sierra asked, though she thought she knew the answer from her own experience with the aftermath of betrayal. Of getting hurt again. Luna whispered, her voice barely audible in the warm bustle of the cafe. Sierra closed her eyes briefly, recognizing the familiar fear that had kept her isolated for 2 years after Marcus left. The fear of investing emotionally in someone who might leave, of opening yourself to the possibility of happiness only to have it snatched away by circumstances beyond your control. When she opened her eyes, she found 3 pairs of earnest blue eyes watching her with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Your mum, Sierra said carefully, not wanting to overstep, but needing to understand their family dynamic. Is she... Do you still see her? The girl's expressions shifted slightly, not with sadness, but with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children develop when dealing with realities they cannot change. She's an actress, Arya said simply. Melissa Hart. She's really famous now. We see her on TV sometimes. Sierra's breath caught. Everyone knew Melissa Hart, beautiful, talented, currently starring in one of the most popular television dramas on network television. The woman was everywhere, gracing magazine covers and red carpets, her perfect smile and designer gowns making her the epitome of success and glamour. She had big dreams, Nova explained, her tone carrying neither bitterness nor judgment. Daddy says she loved us, but she loved acting more. And that's okay. People are allowed to choose what makes them happy. Sierra's heart broke and mended in the same breath. These children had been abandoned by their mother. There was no other word for it yet. They spoke about her choice with a grace and forgiveness that spoke volumes about the way their father had helped them process their loss. Daddy says we're enough, Arya continued, that our family is complete just the way it is, and he doesn't need anyone else to be happy. But we think he's wrong, Nova said firmly, her scientific mind apparently reaching different conclusions than her father's protective instincts. He deserves someone who stays. Luna added, her small voice carrying a conviction that made Sierra want to cry. Before Sierra could respond to the weight of what these three incredible children were offering, Luna reached across the table and touched Sierra's hand with fingers that were surprisingly warm and comforting. "Aunt Jane says you're really nice and smart and kind," Luna said softly. "She says you'd be perfect for our family." Sierra blinked back, the sudden sting in her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of trust these children were placing in her. They were offering her not just their father's heart, but their own, welcoming her into their carefully protected family unit, with the kind of faith that only children could possess. "I don't know if I'm perfect," Sierra said honestly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'd really like to meet your daddy, the real way, when he's ready." "He's ready," all three girls said at once, their voices overlapping in unanimous certainty. "He just doesn't know it yet," Arya added with a knowing smile that made her look far older than 7 years old. 20 minutes later, the triplets had ordered hot chocolate on Sierra's insistence, and the strange interview had transformed into something that felt remarkably like friendship. The girls told her stories about their father's domestic disasters, his attempts to learn hairstyling from YouTube videos, and his terrible singing voice that somehow made bedtime songs even more special. One time, Daddy tried to braid our hair for school pictures. Nova giggled her hot chocolate, leaving a faint mustache on her upper lip. It looked like 3 birds' nests. 3 very fancy birds' nests, Luna corrected loyally, though her eyes were bright with laughter. Sierra found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected, her nervous energy about the date dissolving into genuine enjoyment of these remarkable children's company. They were intelligent, funny, and possessed an emotional maturity that spoke to the quality of parenting they'd received. "What about you?" Arya asked suddenly, tilting her head with curiosity. "Do you have kids?" The question landed softly, but Sierra still felt the familiar pang that always accompanied discussions of children and motherhood. She looked at these 3 beautiful girls, their faces open and interested, and made a decision to be honest. "No," Sierra said, her smile dimming slightly. "I don't have children. Do you want them?" Nova asked, her scientific curiosity overriding any sense that the question might be sensitive. Sierra hesitated. This wasn't typical first date conversation. This wasn't even typical second or third date conversation. But these weren't ordinary circumstances, and these definitely weren't ordinary children. "I did want them," Sierra admitted quietly. "I always thought I would have children someday. But sometimes life doesn't work out the way we plan." "Why not?" Luna asked with the directness that only children could employ without seeming rude. Sierra took a breath, realizing that she was about to share something deeply personal with 3 7-year-olds she'd known for less than an hour. But their genuine interest and complete lack of judgment made the words easier to say. "I was engaged once to someone I thought I loved very much. We were going to get married and start a family together. But then I found out that having children might be very difficult for me, maybe impossible. When I told him, he decided he didn't want to marry me anymore." The triplets absorbed this information with the gravity of much older souls, their faces reflecting the kind of empathy that some adults never develop. "That's really sad," Arya said softly, her young face creased with genuine sympathy. "Yeah," Sierra agreed, surprised by how much lighter the admission felt when met with simple acceptance rather than pity or uncomfortable silence. "It was sad, but I've mostly made peace with it." Nova reached across the table and patted Sierra's hand with the same comforting gesture Luna had used earlier. "Maybe you don't need to have babies," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe you just need to find kids who need someone to love them. Kids like us," Luna added, hopefully, her meaning unmistakable. Sierra's breath caught as she realized the full scope of what these 3 little girls were offering. They weren't just trying to help their father find companionship. They were opening their hearts to the possibility of gaining a mother figure, someone who could love them, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Before Sierra could respond, before she could even process the enormity of the gift being offered, the door to the cafe swung open with enough force to make the bell above it ring frantically. A man stood in the doorway, breathless and wild-eyed, his tie askew and his dark hair slightly disheveled from what appeared to be a desperate rush across town. His gaze swept the cafe with the intensity of someone searching for lost treasure, finally landing on the corner table where 3 blonde heads were bent over hot chocolate cups, and one dark-haired woman sat with an expression somewhere between shocked and enchanted. "Oh no," Arya whispered, her voice carrying more excitement than concern. "He's here." Nova breathed, setting down her hot chocolate with reverent care. "Mission accomplished," Luna said with a grin that suggested she was already planning their next covert operation. Sierra turned toward the doorway, and her heart stopped. Dylan Grant looked exactly as Jane had described, and nothing like Sierra had imagined. Kind eyes, yes, but also tired ones. Strong shoulders that clearly carried more than their share of responsibility. Hands that were gentle enough to braid little girls' hair and capable enough to fix broken computer systems. But more than his physical appearance, what struck Sierra was the love that radiated from every line of his face as he looked at his daughters. Even in his obvious panic and embarrassment, his first concern was clearly for them. His expression cycling rapidly through relief, mortification, and protective worry. He was beautiful in the way that devoted fathers were beautiful, not because of perfect features, but because of the depth of love that shaped everything about him. And Sierra realized, as she watched him gather his courage to cross the cafe and face the disaster his daughters had created, that she was in very serious trouble. Before we continue this incredible journey of love, second chances, and chosen family, we want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know which part of this story touched your heart the most so far. Don't forget to hit that like button if these 3 little matchmakers have already won your heart, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us all that the best families are often the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that love comes in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes our greatest blessings arrive disguised as beautiful interruptions to our carefully planned lives. Dylan Grant had experienced many kinds of panic in his 33 years. The panic of hearing 3 newborns crying in unison at 3 a.m. while he fumbled with bottle warmers and formula mixing. The panic of realizing his wife had walked out the door with nothing but a note and wasn't coming back. The panic of work deadlines, sick children, and the constant fear that he wasn't enough for the enormous responsibility of raising 3 daughters alone. But this, standing in the doorway of Rosewood Cafe, staring at his 3 mischievous daughters, sitting with the woman he was supposed to impress, this was panic on an entirely different level. His phone had been buzzing incessantly for the past 20 minutes, while he'd been elbow-deep in server diagnostics, trying to restore TechFlow's crashed network before their clients lost millions in revenue. He'd ignored the first few messages from Rachel, assuming they were routine updates about homework completion or dinner preferences. Mr. Grant, the first text had read at 6:45 p.m., "The girls are insisting I take them out for dinner. They said you approved it. Then at 7:03, we're at Rosewood Cafe. The girls said they wanted to try the food here. Hope that's okay." And finally, at 7:15, the message that had made Dylan's blood run cold. "Mr. Grant, I think you should come here. The girls found someone they know and are having quite an intense conversation with her. I'm not sure what's happening, but they seem very focused on whatever they're discussing." Dylan's hands had frozen over his keyboard as the implications hit him like a freight train. Rosewood Cafe, the place where he was supposed to meet Sierra Brooks at 7 p.m., the date he'd been nervous about for 3 days, the first romantic encounter he'd attempted in over 7 years. His daughters, his brilliant, well-meaning, absolutely impossible daughters, had somehow orchestrated their presence at his first date. The server crisis had to wait. Dylan had grabbed his jacket, abandoned his workstation despite Marcus's protests, and driven across town with his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. During the 15-minute drive, his mind had cycled through every possible scenario, each one more mortifying than the last. Maybe Sierra had already left, disgusted by the intrusion of 3 uninvited children. Maybe she was sitting there in polite horror, trying to figure out how to escape gracefully. Maybe she thought this was some kind of elaborate scam or psychological manipulation. But as Dylan stood in the doorway of the cafe, taking in the scene before him, he realized that all of his panicked assumptions had been wrong. Sierra Brooks sat at the corner table, leaning forward with genuine engagement as she listened to something Luna was explaining with animated hand gestures. Her dark hair caught the warm lighting. Her smile was real rather than forced, and her body language suggested comfort rather than the rigid politeness of someone trapped in an uncomfortable situation. More shocking than Sierra's apparent ease was the sight of his daughters. All 3 girls were completely relaxed, their usual first meeting shyness nowhere to be seen. They were chattering and laughing, their hot chocolate cups evidence of an extended conversation that had clearly been going well. This was either the best possible outcome or a disaster of such magnitude that Dylan couldn't yet comprehend its scope. "Hi, Daddy." Luna's voice rang out across the cafe, bright with delight and completely devoid of the guilt Dylan had expected to hear. Every patron in the restaurant turned to look at him. An elderly couple smiled knowingly. The barista behind the counter grinned with obvious entertainment. A woman at a nearby table whispered something to her companion that made them both chuckle. Dylan felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized he was now the center of attention in a romantic restaurant, while wearing his work clothes, sporting disheveled hair from his panicked drive, and trying to figure out how to handle the most unconventional first date in the history of modern romance. He forced his legs to move, crossing the space between the door and Sierra's table in what felt like slow motion. With each step he tried to formulate an apology adequate for the situation, but words seemed inadequate for the level of mortification he was experiencing. When he reached the table, he didn't know whether to address Sierra first, discipline his daughters, or simply turn around and flee back to his car. Instead, he stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, looking like a man whose carefully constructed life had just been turned upside down by 3 7-year-olds with a romantic agenda. "I am so sorry," Dylan began, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I had absolutely no idea they were coming here. I was at work dealing with an emergency, and I thought they were safe at home with their nanny, and I never imagined they would." He gestured helplessly at the scene before him. Sierra held up a hand, her eyes twinkling with something that looked suspiciously like amusement rather than annoyance. "You must be the man who stood me up." Dylan winced visibly. "Not intentionally. I swear I was planning to call as soon as I could get away from the crisis at work. I would never just not show up without explanation." Daddy Arya interrupted gently, her voice carrying the patient tone children used when adults were being unnecessarily dramatic. "She's not mad. We explained everything. We told her about the server emergency," Nova added helpfully. "And about how you were really nervous this morning. And about the pancakes." "The pancakes?" Dylan asked weakly. "How you burned them because you were thinking about tonight instead of watching the stove," Luna clarified, as if this was perfectly normal information to share with a stranger. Dylan closed his eyes briefly, wondering if it was possible to die from embarrassment. When he opened them, he found Sierra watching him with an expression that was definitely more amused than horrified. "Your daughters are excellent company," Sierra said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "They've been telling me all about you." "Oh no," Dylan muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "What exactly have they told you?" "Mostly good things." Sierra replied with a laugh that made something loosen in Dylan's chest. "Except for your cooking skills. They were very specific about your limitations in the kitchen." The triplets giggled in unison, clearly proud of their successful intelligence-gathering mission. Dylan looked at his daughters, really looked at them, and saw the careful hope in their eyes beneath their cheerful mischief. They were watching him with the intensity of children who had taken an enormous risk and were waiting to see if it would pay off. "Girls," Dylan said, his voice gentle but serious. "You know what you did was wrong, right? You can't just show up to someone's dinner without permission, and you definitely can't lie to Rachel about where you're going." "We didn't exactly lie," Arya said carefully. "We used strategic information management. We learned that from you," Nova added unhelpfully. "And our hearts were in the right place." Luna finished her lower lip, trembling slightly with the possibility that their plan might not succeed after all. Sierra watched the exchange with fascination. Even in his obvious mortification, Dylan's first concern was for his daughter's understanding of right and wrong. He wasn't yelling or threatening punishment, he was having a conversation about values and choices, treating them like people whose reasoning mattered. "I should probably take them home," Dylan said to Sierra, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Let you escape from this chaos before it gets worse." "Actually," Sierra said, surprising herself with her words, "I was hoping you might consider staying. I came here to meet someone tonight, and technically I did meet someone. 3 someones, actually. But I haven't gotten to meet their father yet." Dylan stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You want us to stay?" "All of us, well," Arya said quickly, seeing an opportunity to advance their cause. "Sierra could come have dinner with us instead. That way you still get your date, and we get to help make sure it goes well. We're really good at conversation," Nova added seriously. "And we have excellent table manners. Plus," Luna said with the devastating logic that only children could employ this way, "you can see how Sierra fits with our whole family, not just with you." Dylan looked around the table at his 3 beaming daughters, at Sierra's encouraging smile, at the curious faces of other diners who were clearly invested in the outcome of this unusual situation. "I don't want to impose," Dylan said to Sierra, though his voice carried a hint of hope that suggested he was warming to the idea. "You're not imposing," Sierra assured him. "I cleared my evening for this date. I'm just getting a more comprehensive introduction than I expected." Dylan pulled out the remaining chair and sat down slowly, still looking like a man who wasn't entirely sure what reality he'd stumbled into. "Okay," he said softly. "But if this gets too overwhelming, just say the word, and I'll take them home." "Deal." Sierra agreed, then turned to address the girls directly. "But I think we need to have a conversation about proper first date protocol. In the future, when your father meets someone new, it's generally considered polite to let them have at least one conversation alone before conducting family interviews." The triplets nodded solemnly, though their eyes sparkled with unrepentant mischief. "In the future," Arya repeated thoughtfully. "Does that mean there might be other dates with other ladies?" Nova said with the scientific precision that characterized all her observations. "Does it mean future dates with the same lady? Because statistically speaking, that would be a much more efficient use of everyone's time." Sierra felt her cheeks warm as she realized she'd inadvertently suggested the possibility of future romantic encounters. Dylan's ears turned slightly pink, but he was smiling now, the panic finally beginning to fade from his expression. "Let's see how this date goes first," Sierra said diplomatically before we start planning the next one. "But you're not running away?" Luna observed with satisfaction. "That's a good sign, right?" "Daddy?" Dylan looked at Sierra, really looked at her for the first time since his panicked arrival. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was kind. She had every reason to be frustrated or overwhelmed by the situation his daughters had created. but instead she was rolling with it, engaging with their enthusiasm while gently establishing appropriate boundaries. "Yes," Dylan said quietly, his eyes meeting Sierra's with something that looked like grateful wonder. "That's a very good sign." Dylan's house was exactly what Sierra expected, and nothing like she imagined. From the outside, it looked like dozens of other modest two-story homes in the established neighborhood. Red brick, white trim, a small front porch with 2 rocking chairs that had seen better years. But as soon as Dylan unlocked the front door and ushered his family inside, Sierra realized she was stepping into something extraordinary. The walls were a gallery of childhood creativity. Crayon drawings of stick-figure families covered every available surface at child height, held in place with tape that had yellowed with age. Finger paintings of flowers and rainbows shared space with more sophisticated artwork that spoke to developing artistic abilities. The refrigerator was completely hidden beneath layers of school worksheets, spelling tests marked with gold stars and photos from various school events. "Welcome to our castle," Arya announced with a dramatic sweep of her arm, clearly proud of her home's appearance. "It's not actually a castle," Nova clarified with scientific precision, "but we like to pretend sometimes. Every house is a castle if you love the people in it," Luna said with the wisdom that seemed to flow naturally from her 7-year-old perspective. Sierra paused in the entryway, taking in the organized chaos that spoke of a single parent doing his absolute best. Shoes were lined up neatly by the door, but there were 6 pairs instead of the usual 2-person household complement. Backpacks hung on hooks marked with each girl's name in Dylan's careful handwriting. A family calendar dominated the wall space near the kitchen entrance, every square filled with color-coded activities, dance class, dentist appointments, parent-teacher conferences, and in Thursday's square, written in blue ink, "Date with Sierra." Sierra's breath caught as she spotted her name there among the ordinary rhythms of their daily life. Dylan had made space for her in his carefully managed schedule before they'd even met, placing her between Luna's dentist appointment and Friday's grocery shopping, as if she was already woven into the fabric of their days. The thought made her chest feel too full and too light all at once. It was a home built by a single father doing his best. And that best, Sierra realized, was pretty extraordinary. "Welcome to our castle," Arya announced, spreading her arms dramatically. "It's not actually a castle," Nova clarified. "But we pretend. Every house is a castle if you love the people in it," Luna said wisely. Dylan shot Sierra an apologetic look. "They've been reading a lot of fairy tales." "I love fairy tales," Sierra said. And meant it. The girls dragged her on a tour while Dylan disappeared into the kitchen. They showed her their room, 3 beds arranged in a U-shape, each with different colored blankets. They showed her their art corner, their toy chest, the bookshelf overflowing with stories. And they showed her pictures. "That's us when we were babies." Arya pointed to a frame on the hallway wall. "Daddy says we were very loud and very small." In the photo, a younger Dylan held 3 tiny bundles, his expression a mixture of terror and overwhelming love. There were other pictures, too. Dylan and the girls at the park, at the beach, birthday parties, Halloween costumes. But there was one person conspicuously absent from every frame. "Your mom," Sierra said carefully. "Do you remember her?" "Not really," Arya admitted. "We were really little when she left. Daddy keeps one picture of her in his room. He says it's important we know what she looks like. Even if we don't see her," Luna added quietly. Sierra's heart ached for them, and for Dylan, who'd been left to pick up the pieces alone. "He must love you very much," Sierra said. "He does," Arya said confidently. "That's why we want him to be happy." "He is happy," Nova insisted. "But he could be happier with you," Luna said, looking up at Sierra with those impossibly hopeful eyes. Sierra knelt down to their level, her voice gentle but honest. "I can't promise anything, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out. But you like him, right? Arya pressed. Sierra thought about the man in the kitchen frantically trying to cook dinner for 5. The man who'd raised 3 incredible daughters on his own. The man who still kept a picture of the woman who'd left him because he wanted his children to know their mother. I think, Sierra said slowly, your daddy is one of the good ones. The triplets beamed. Dinner's ready, Dylan called from the kitchen. Or at least it's edible. Dinner was a beautiful disaster. The pasta was slightly overcooked. The garlic bread was unevenly toasted. The salad was mostly just lettuce. But the company was perfect. The triplets talked over each other, telling stories and asking Sierra a million questions. Dylan interjected with corrections and apologies, his ears pink with embarrassment. And Sierra laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laughter that comes from joy, not politeness. So what do you do? Dylan asked during a brief lull, seizing the chance for actual conversation. I'm a CEO, Sierra said. I run a non-profit that helps underprivileged kids access arts education. That's amazing, Dylan said, genuine admiration in his voice. It's fulfilling, Sierra agreed. I always wanted to make a difference, and since I couldn't have kids of my own, she stopped realizing what she'd said. The table went quiet. Sorry, Sierra said quickly. That's not really dinner conversation. We already know, Arya said gently. You told us at the cafe. Dylan looked between Sierra and his daughters, understanding dawning. You told them? They asked. Sierra said with a small smile. And I'm not good at lying to children. Dylan's expression softened. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was, Sierra admitted. My fiancé left when he found out. He said it wasn't what he signed up for. Dylan's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his face. He sounds like a jerk. Daddy, all 3 girls gasped in unison. No curse words, Arya reminded him, wagging her tiny finger. That's our family rule, Nova added seriously. Even when people deserve it? Luna chimed in, though she nodded in agreement with her father's sentiment. Dylan held up his hands in surrender, his ears turning slightly pink. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry, girls. Sierra's heart swelled watching the exchange. These little girls holding their father accountable with such innocent conviction, and Dylan accepting the correction with grace and a sheepish smile. It's okay. Sierra said, her voice soft with emotion. And they're right. But between us adults, he kind of was. Dylan gave her a knowing look that said, I'm glad you see it too. He taught me something important, though. Sierra said, her gaze moving around the table. What Luna asked, leaning forward with curiosity. That family isn't just about biology, Sierra said, looking at each face around the table. It's about love and showing up and choosing each other every day. She looked at Dylan, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of shared wounds that had started to heal. Yeah, Dylan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. It is. After dinner, the girls insisted on showing Sierra their bedtime routine. Dylan tried to protest. She doesn't need to see the chaos. But Sierra waved him off. She watched as Dylan read them a story, his voice doing different characters, making them giggle. She watched as he kissed each forehead, tucking blankets with practiced ease. Love you, Daddy, they chorused. Love you more, he replied, the same way he probably did every night. When he finally emerged, he found Sierra standing in the living room, looking at the photos on the wall. Thank you, he said quietly, for being so kind to them. You didn't have to stay. I wanted to, Sierra said honestly. Dylan, your daughters are incredible. You've done an amazing job. I've done my best, he said. But some days I wonder if it's enough. It's more than enough, Sierra assured him. They're brave and kind and full of love. They got that from you. Dylan looked away, his jaw working. Their mother left when they were 6 months old. She was a rising actress. Melissa Hart. You might have heard of her. Sierra had. Everyone had. Melissa Hart was everywhere these days. Magazines, movies, award shows. She never wanted children. Dylan continued, his voice low. But birth control failed, and suddenly she was pregnant with triplets. She tried to make it work, but when they were 6 months old, she got a call about an audition, a big one. Career changing, and the girls were sick. I was at work. She had to choose. And she chose the audition. Sierra finished softly. She said she'd send money visit, but after a year even the calls stopped. Dylan's hands clenched. I don't resent her for choosing her dream, but I resent her for making them feel like they weren't enough. They don't feel that way. They know they're loved. Because of you, Dylan said, I made sure of that. But I've been terrified of bringing anyone into their lives. What if I choose wrong? What if someone else leaves and breaks their hearts? Dylan, Sierra said, stepping closer. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise I know what it feels like to be left. And I'd never do that to someone else. He met her eyes, and for the first time all night she saw the weight he carried, the fear, the hope. Jane was right, he said. You are special. So are you, Sierra whispered. They stood there, two people who'd been broken in different ways, recognizing something in each other that felt like the beginning of healing. Would you like to do this again properly? A real date. I'd love that, but fair warning. I might insist your daughters come along sometimes. They're kind of the best part of the package. Dylan laughed, and it was the sound of a man remembering what hope felt like. 3 weeks after the infamous first date, Dylan found himself standing in front of his bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., trying to convince himself that the knot in his stomach was excitement rather than terror. Tonight was their second official date dinner at Romano's, just the two of them, like normal adults who hadn't been introduced by their matchmaking 7-year-olds. Daddy, you're doing the tie thing again, Luna observed from the bathroom doorway, still in her princess pajamas, and holding her favorite stuffed rabbit. Dylan's hands froze mid-adjustment. What tie thing? The nervous tie thing, Arya clarified, appearing beside her sister. Like before the first date, but worse. Much worse. Nova added, completing their early morning tribunal. You've been checking your reflection every 5 minutes for the past hour. Dylan sighed, releasing his grip on the offending necktie. Is it that obvious? Daddy Luna said with the gentle patience children reserved for particularly slow adults. You showered twice last night and once this morning. You ironed your shirt 3 times, and you practiced conversation topics while making breakfast. We heard you asking yourself about Sierra's favorite movies, Nova added helpfully. While you burned the eggs. Heat crept up Dylan's neck. After 7 years of single parenting, he'd forgotten how observant children could be about adult behavior. Nothing escaped the notice of 3 intelligent girls who had made their father's emotional well-being their primary concern. I'm nervous, Dylan admitted, sitting on the edge of the bathtub so he could meet their eyes. It's been a really long time since I've tried to date someone properly. But you like Sierra, Arya stated with the confidence of someone who had witnessed their father's transformation over the past 3 weeks. I like Sierra very much, Dylan confirmed, remembering how easily conversation had flowed during their impromptu family dinner, how naturally Sierra had fit into their chaotic household routine. And Sierra likes you, Luna added. She called yesterday just to ask how your work presentation went, and she sent those books about space exploration for me. Arya contributed. She remembered that I want to be an astronaut. Plus, she helped me fix my robot arm when she was here on Sunday, Nova said. She's really good with mechanical things. Dylan smiled despite his nerves. Sierra had been gradually becoming part of their lives in small, natural ways. Sunday afternoon visits that turned into extended stays. Phone calls that started as check-ins and evolved into hour-long conversations after the girls went to bed. Text messages throughout the day about work, stress, funny kid stories, and the gradual sharing of daily life details that built intimacy. But tonight would be their first time alone together since that chaotic evening at Rosewood Cafe. No children to mediate conversation, no domestic activities to provide natural interaction. Just two adults trying to determine if their connection could survive outside the comfortable buffer of parental responsibilities. What if we don't have anything to talk about without you three as entertainment? Dylan voiced his deepest fear. The girls exchanged the kind of look that preceded their most profound observations. Daddy Arya said gently, "You talk to Sierra on the phone for hours after we go to bed. We hear you laughing from downstairs. And when she's here, you forget to check your work emails," Rover added. "You never forget to check your work emails. She makes you happy in a different way than we do." Luna concluded with the emotional intelligence that never ceased to amaze Dylan. "Like you're happy being yourself, not just happy being our daddy." The truth of his daughter's observation hit Dylan with startling clarity. For 7 years, his entire identity had been shaped by fatherhood. Every decision, every priority, every moment of joy had been filtered through his role as a single parent. But when Sierra was around, Dylan found himself remembering the man he'd been before Melissa left, before his world narrowed to the boundaries of his daughter's needs. Sierra saw him as Dylan, not just as a devoted father. She laughed at his terrible jokes, asked about his work projects, remembered details about his interests that he'd nearly forgotten himself. When was the last time someone had cared about his thoughts on politics, his opinions about movies, his dreams that extended beyond providing stability for his children? "You're right," Dylan said, standing and straightening his shirt with renewed confidence. "Sierra and I do have plenty to talk about. Just don't overthink it," Nova advised with the scientific precision that characterized her approach to problem-solving. Overthinking leads to awkward conversation and weird pauses. "Be yourself," Arya added. "You're pretty great when you're not trying so hard. And if you get nervous, just remember that Sierra already chose to keep dating you after meeting us," Luna said with a grin. "That means she's probably going to stick around." Romano's was exactly the kind of restaurant Dylan had forgotten existed. Soft lighting, intimate tables, waiters who moved quietly and didn't rush couples through their meals. Dylan arrived 10 minutes early, his palms slightly damp despite his daughter's confidence-building pep talk. Sierra appeared in the doorway at exactly 7 p.m., and Dylan felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple black dress that emphasized her natural beauty without trying too hard, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. But what struck him most was her smile when she spotted him genuine, warm, and slightly nervous in a way that made his own anxiety settle into something more manageable. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from him with the grace of someone comfortable in her own skin. "Hi, Dylan," replied, amazed at how one simple word could carry so much possibility. The first hour passed in a blur of easy conversation that justified his daughter's confidence. They talked about Sierra's work, expanding arts programs into underserved schools, Dylan's recent promotion to senior systems architect, their shared love of obscure documentaries and terrible reality television. Without the delightful chaos of 3 children, they discovered layers of compatibility that had been present but unexplored. "I have a confession," Sierra said as they shared dessert, her voice carrying a hint of mischief that Dylan was learning to associate with her more playful moments. "Should I be worried?" Dylan asked, though his smile suggested he was enjoying whatever was coming. "I may have done some research on you after our first date," Sierra admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Nothing stalkerish, just basic Google searches to make sure you weren't a serial killer or anything." "And what did your investigation reveal?" Dylan asked, genuinely curious about what information existed about his decidedly unglamorous life. "That you volunteer at the children's hospital on weekends?" Sierra said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Reading to kids in the oncology ward. The newspaper did a little feature about you last year." Dylan looked down at his coffee cup, embarrassed by the recognition. "It's not a big deal. After Melissa left, I realized how lucky we were that the girls were healthy. It seemed important to give something back." Dylan, Sierra said softly, waiting until he met her eyes. "You volunteer at a children's hospital while raising 3 daughters as a single parent. That's not a big deal. That's extraordinary." The conversation that followed revealed depths of character that deepened their mutual attraction beyond physical chemistry or compatible life circumstances. Sierra told him about her decision to start the non-profit after Marcus left, how she'd channeled her grief about never having biological children into creating opportunities for other people's kids. Dylan shared his fears about raising daughters without a mother's guidance, his ongoing worry that he was missing crucial elements of their emotional development. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Melissa had stayed?" Sierra asked, carefully testing the boundaries of what they could discuss. Dylan considered the question seriously, swirling wine in his glass while he formulated a response. "I used to wonder about that a lot. But honestly, I think we would have made each other miserable. Melissa never wanted to be a mother. Forcing her to stay would have hurt the girls more than her leaving did. Do they ask about her?" "Sometimes. Less now than when they were younger." Dylan's voice carried the weight of difficult conversations and careful explanations. "I've tried to help them understand that their mother loved them but couldn't be what they needed. That sometimes people have to choose paths that don't include the people they care about." Sierra nodded, recognizing the careful emotional work Dylan had done to help his daughters process abandonment without internalizing it as personal failure. "What about you?" Dylan asked. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Marcus had stayed after your diagnosis?" "I used to," Sierra replied honestly. "But I've realized that anyone who would leave over something I couldn't control wasn't someone I should want to spend my life with. The right person doesn't love you despite your limitations. They love you, including them." The weight of that statement settled between them, carrying implications neither was quite ready to voice, but both clearly understood. As Dylan walked Sierra to her car after dinner, he found himself moving more slowly than necessary, reluctant to end an evening that had exceeded his wildest hopes. They'd talked for 3 hours without a single awkward pause, discovered shared values, and complementary differences laughed until other diners turned to look at them with amused tolerance. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Sierra said, turning to face him in the parking lot under a canopy of stars that seemed arranged specifically for this moment. "So did I," Dylan replied, stepping closer without conscious thought. "Would you like to do this again?" "Definitely," Sierra said, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that made Dylan's heart race with possibility. Their first kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like a conversation that had been building for weeks, finally finding its conclusion. Dylan's hands cupped Sierra's face with reverent gentleness, and she rose on her toes to meet him halfway, both of them pouring months of careful courtship and growing attraction into a moment that felt like coming home. When they broke apart, both breathing slightly harder than the kiss alone warranted, Dylan rested his forehead against Sierra's and smiled. "The girls are going to be impossible when I get home," he said. "They've been planning this evening's success for weeks." "Tell them their matchmaking skills are exceptional," Sierra replied with a laugh that sent warmth cascading through Dylan's chest. As he drove home that night, Dylan found himself remembering what it felt like to be a man with romantic possibilities. Someone whose story wasn't finished, whose future might include partnership and shared dreams beyond the boundaries of single parenthood. For the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to not carry every burden alone. 2 months later, Sierra had become a regular fixture at the Grant household's weekend activities. She attended Aria's science fair presentation, on planetary atmospheres, cheering louder than any other parent when Aria won second place in the middle school division. She helped Nova design and build a contraption for catching butterflies without hurting them, spending an entire Saturday afternoon in the garage with power tools and craft supplies. She accompanied Luna on rock hunting expeditions, learning to identify different types of stones and genuinely celebrating each new discovery. But more than her connection with the girls, Sierra's relationship with Dylan continued to deepen in ways that surprised them both. She understood his need to prioritize his daughters while making space for their adult relationship. He appreciated her independence while creating room for her in their established family routines. Their phone conversations after the girls' bedtime became sacred rituals, sometimes lasting until midnight, as they shared work frustrations, childhood memories, and gradually more intimate details about their fears and dreams. Sierra learned about Dylan's abandoned plans to pursue graduate school in computer science, derailed by sudden single parenthood. Dylan discovered Sierra's secret talent for painting watercolor landscapes, a hobby she'd neglected since Marcus left. "Why did you stop painting?" Dylan asked one evening as they cleaned up after another chaotic family dinner. Sierra paused in her dish drying, considering how much honesty their relationship could handle. "Marcus used to make fun of my paintings. He said they looked like greeting cards, not real art." Dylan's jaw tightened with the familiar anger he felt whenever Sierra's ex-fiancé came up in conversation. "Can I see them sometime? Your paintings, I mean." "They're not very good," Sierra said quickly. "Just silly landscapes, nothing special." "The girls would love to see what you create," Dylan pressed gently. "They're always asking about different art techniques." A week later, Sierra arrived for Sunday dinner with a portfolio of watercolor landscapes that took Dylan's breath away. Her paintings captured the subtle beauty of everyday scenes, sunset over suburban rooftops, rain-soaked park benches, morning light filtering through kitchen windows with a tenderness that revealed the artist's heart. "Sierra, these are incredible," Dylan said, studying a painting of children playing in a sprinkler while their parents watched from lawn chairs. "Why would anyone criticize work like this?" "Because Marcus thought art should be challenging, intellectual, difficult to understand," Sierra replied, watching the girls examine her paintings with genuine fascination. "He said my work was too accessible, too emotional." "Too emotional." Nova looked up from a painting of storm clouds gathering over a playground. "But emotion is what makes art good. That's what Daddy always tells us. Art should make you feel something," Aria agreed, studying a watercolor of an elderly couple sharing a park bench. "This makes me feel happy and sad at the same time, but in a good way. That's called bittersweet Luna," added, demonstrating the expanded vocabulary that came from living with a father who read extensively and encouraged intellectual curiosity. "It's when something is beautiful because it's a little sad." Dylan watched Sierra's face transform as his daughters discussed her work with the kind of appreciation she'd been denied by someone who was supposed to love and support her creativity. The way her eyes filled with tears, the trembling smile that spoke of artistic validation years in the making. It was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever witnessed. "Would you teach us to paint like this?" Aria asked hopefully. "I mean, if you want to. If you have time." "I'd love that," Sierra said, her voice thick with emotion. And so Sunday afternoon painting lessons became another tradition in the Grant household, with Sierra setting up easels in the kitchen while Dylan cooked elaborate dinners that no longer featured burnt offerings. Watching Sierra guide his daughters through color mixing and brush techniques, seeing her patience when Nova got frustrated with perspective, or her encouragement when Luna declared her sky all wrong, Dylan found himself falling deeper into something that felt less like dating and more like building a life together. The shift happened so gradually that Dylan almost missed it, the way Sierra started keeping a toothbrush in his bathroom, how she began receiving mail at his address from catalogs and subscriptions, the way the girls automatically set a fourth place at the dinner table without being asked. Sierra's presence had become so natural, so essential to their family rhythm that Dylan couldn't remember what their routine had felt like before her. But as comfortable as their relationship had become, Dylan found himself occasionally gripped by moments of terror that arrived without warning. Usually late at night after Sierra had gone home to her apartment, and the house felt too quiet, too empty, too dependent on someone who had no legal obligation to stay. What if Sierra grew tired of the constant responsibility of 3 children who weren't biologically hers? What if she met someone without the complications of pre-existing family obligations? What if she realized that loving him meant accepting a package deal she hadn't signed up for? The fears that haunted Dylan's sleepless hours were about to be tested by circumstances beyond his control in ways that would challenge everything he thought he understood about love commitment and the difference between temporary happiness and permanent partnership. The call came at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday, just as Dylan was settling into bed with a book and the contented exhaustion that followed another successful evening of homework supervision, bath time negotiations, and bedtime story dramatics. His phone buzzed against the nightstand, displaying a number he hadn't seen in over 2 years, but still recognized with the kind of visceral dread reserved for ghosts from the past. Melissa Hart was calling. Dylan stared at the screen for 3 rings, his mind cycling through possibilities, none of them good. Melissa never called. In the 7 years since she'd left, their communication had been limited to sporadic emails about legal documents and the occasional birthday card sent through her assistant. Direct phone contact was unprecedented and therefore terrifying. "Hello, Dylan," answered his voice, carefully neutral. "Dylan. It's Melissa." Her voice sounded different, more polished, carrying the kind of confidence that came with professional success. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "It's fine," Dylan lied, sitting up in bed and running his free hand through his hair. "Is everything okay?" A pause that stretched long enough for Dylan to imagine dozens of catastrophic scenarios. "I need to talk to you about the girls. About seeing them. I know it's been a long time, but my life has settled down now, and I think I'm ready to be part of their lives again." Dylan felt the floor drop out from under him. His chest constricted with the kind of panic he hadn't experienced since the early days of single parenthood, when every crisis felt like potential proof that he wasn't capable of protecting his daughters from the complexities of their situation. "Melissa, the girls barely remember you," Dylan said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "You've been gone for 7 years. You can't just decide to reappear because your career is stable now." "I know I made mistakes," Melissa continued, and Dylan could hear the carefully prepared nature of her words, like she'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "I was young and scared and completely unprepared for motherhood. But I've grown up, Dylan. I've had therapy. I've gotten my life together, and I want to make amends." Amends. The word came out harder than Dylan intended. "Melissa, these aren't mistakes you can make amends for. These are 3 little girls who have spent their entire lives wondering why their mother didn't want them enough to stay." "That's not—" Melissa started, then stopped. "Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry. But they're my daughters too, and I have legal rights." The phrase legal rights hit Dylan like a physical blow. Legal rights meant custody arrangements, court hearings, judges' decisions, about what was best for the children that might not align with what actually was best for his daughters. "What exactly are you asking for?" Dylan managed. "I want to see them. Video calls at first, maybe some visits. I'm not trying to disrupt their lives, Dylan. I just want to be their mother. You gave up the right to be their mother when you walked out." Dylan said the words carrying 7 years of suppressed anger and protective fury. "You don't get to decide you want that role back when it's convenient for you. After Melissa hung up, promising to be in touch soon about arrangement details, Dylan sat in his darkened bedroom staring at the phone in his hands, while his heart hammered against his ribs with the force of pure terror. Everything was about to change. Everything he'd built, every routine he'd established, every sense of security his daughters possessed was about to be thrown into chaos by someone who had forfeited the right to disrupt their lives years ago. His first instinct was to call Sierra. She would listen, help him process, offer the kind of emotional support he'd come to depend on over the past 4 months. But as Dylan started to dial her number, a different kind of fear stopped him cold. What would Sierra think about being dragged into this level of family drama? Dating a single father was one thing, helping him navigate custody battles with a famous actress who might want partial custody of 3 children was something else entirely. Sierra had signed up for Sunday dinners and school events, not legal battles and media attention, and the emotional minefield of helping children reconnect with a mother who had abandoned them. Dylan set the phone down without making the call, recognizing with horrible clarity that this crisis was about to test every assumption he'd made about his relationship with Sierra. Did she love him enough to weather this storm? Did she love the girls enough to fight for their emotional stability? Or would this be the moment she realized that loving him came with complications too big for someone without legal or biological connection to handle? The next 3 days passed in a haze of obsessive research and escalating anxiety. Dylan found himself reading articles about celebrity custody cases, researching family law attorneys, and trying to figure out how to prepare 3 7-year-olds for the potential reappearance of a mother they barely remembered. He moved through their regular routine like a man underwater, smiling during breakfast conversations and helping with homework while his mind churned with worst-case scenarios. What if Melissa demanded shared custody? What if the girls were forced to spend summers in Los Angeles with a woman who was essentially a stranger? What if exposure to Melissa's glamorous lifestyle made them dissatisfied with their modest life in suburban anonymity? Sierra noticed his distraction immediately. "You've been quiet the last few days," she said. Thursday evening, as they cleaned up after dinner. "Everything okay?" Dylan paused in his dish loading, realizing he'd reached a crossroads. He could tell Sierra about Melissa's call, share the burden of his fear, and risk discovering that their relationship wasn't strong enough to handle this level of complexity. Or he could try to manage the crisis alone, protecting Sierra from drama she hadn't signed up for, while potentially isolating himself from the support he desperately needed. "Just work stress," Dylan said, choosing the coward's path. "Big project deadline coming up." Sierra studied his face with the perceptive attention he usually appreciated, but currently found uncomfortable. "Dylan, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? Whatever's bothering you, we can figure it out together." The offer was everything Dylan wanted and nothing he felt capable of accepting. How could he ask Sierra to help him navigate a situation that might result in partial custody arrangements, media attention, and ongoing drama with his children's biological mother? How could he risk her walking away just when his daughters needed stability most? "I know," Dylan said, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. "Really, it's just work stuff, nothing I can't handle." But Friday morning brought the crisis Dylan had been dreading since Melissa's call. The girls were finishing breakfast when Aria's tablet, which had been lying innocently on the kitchen counter, chimed with a video call notification. 3 blonde heads turned toward the sound, their faces curious rather than alarmed. Video calls were routine in their household, grandparents checking in, friends coordinating playdates, Sierra calling from work to ask about after-school plans. Dylan reached for the tablet, hoping to intercept whatever spam call had gotten through their filters, and felt his blood turn to ice when he saw the caller ID Melissa Hart. "Who's calling, Daddy Luna?" asked, noting his sudden stillness. Dylan stared at the screen, paralyzed by indecision. Answer and force his daughters into an interaction they weren't prepared for. decline and face Melissa's inevitable escalation to more direct contact methods. Let the call go to voicemail and deal with the girl's curiosity about why he was suddenly acting strange about a simple video call. The decision was made for him when Nova, with the helpful efficiency that characterized all her problem-solving, reached over and accepted the call before Dylan could stop her. "Hello," Nova said brightly, her face appearing in the small window that showed their video feed. Melissa Hart's professionally lit face filled the tablet screen, her smile camera-ready and her appearance flawless in the way that came from years of professional styling and makeup artistry. She looked exactly like the woman Dylan remembered, beautiful, polished, completely put together, but older, more confident, carrying herself with the assurance that success had given her. "Hi, sweetheart, Melissa," said her voice warm, but carrying an undertone of nervous excitement. "You must be Nova. You look so much like me when I was your age." Nova's face scrunched with confusion as she processed this statement. Dylan stepped into the camera's view, his protective instincts overriding his paralysis. "Girls, go get ready for school," Dylan said firmly. "Now!" But they were already frozen in place, staring at the tablet screen with dawning recognition. Arya moved closer, her face taking on the careful, analytical expression she wore when trying to solve complex problems. "Are you—" Arya started, then stopped, looking at Dylan with eyes that held too much understanding for a 7-year-old. "I'm your mother," Melissa said gently, her smile never wavering despite the obvious shock on her daughters' faces. "I know it's been a long time and you might not remember me very well, but I've missed you so much. I've been thinking about you every day." Luna burst into tears, not the dramatic crying of childhood disappointment or physical injury, but the deep, silent tears that came from emotional overwhelm. She stood perfectly still, tears streaming down her cheeks, staring at the screen like she was seeing a ghost. "Luna, baby, don't cry," Melissa said, her composure cracking slightly. "I know this is sudden, but—" "You left," Arya said with devastating simplicity. "You left us when we were babies." Dylan's heart shattered at the raw pain in his daughter's voice. These children had processed their mother's abandonment with remarkable grace over the years, but seeing her face, hearing her voice, being confronted with the reality of her continued existence while she'd been absent from their lives, it was too much for anyone to handle, let alone children. "I had to make some very difficult choices," Melissa said, her media training evident in the way she tried to control the narrative. "I was very young, and I wasn't ready to be the mother you deserved. But I'm ready now." "Are you going to leave again?" Nova asked with scientific directness that cut through Melissa's carefully prepared explanations. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Dylan watched Melissa's perfect composure falter for the first time in the conversation. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going to leave again. I want to be part of your lives now." Dylan ended the call. His hands were shaking as he closed the tablet, and turned to face his daughters, who were staring at him with expressions that combined hurt, confusion, anger, and a desperate need for reassurance that their world wasn't about to fall apart. Daddy Luna whispered through her tears, "Is she really our mom? Yes," Dylan said, kneeling down to meet them at eye level. "That was your biological mother, Melissa." "Why did she call us Arya?" asked her analytical mind, trying to make sense of motives and timing. "She says she wants to be part of your lives now," Dylan answered honestly, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "Do we have to see her?" Nova asked, her voice small and uncertain, in a way that was completely unlike her usual confidence. "I don't know yet," Dylan admitted. "There are some legal things that Daddy needs to figure out. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, you are safe, you are loved, and you are my daughters. Nothing will ever change that." The girls were unusually quiet during the drive to school, processing the morning's revelation in their own ways. Dylan spent the day making phone calls to family law attorneys, researching custody modification procedures, and trying to figure out how to protect his daughters from being used as pawns in Melissa's attempt to rehabilitate her public image as someone who had grown enough to want her abandoned children back. That afternoon, Sierra arrived for what had become her regular Thursday dinner visit, taking one look at Dylan's face and immediately understanding that something catastrophic had occurred. "What happened?" she asked without preamble. Dylan looked at the woman who had become essential to his happiness, the person his daughters adored, the partner he'd been slowly learning to trust with his heart and his family, and he realized that this moment would define everything about their future together. "Melissa called," he said simply. "She wants back into the girls' lives." Sierra's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, concern, understanding, and then something that looked like resolve. "Okay," she said, sitting down beside him on the couch. "Tell me everything." As Dylan explained the phone call, the video chat, his daughter's reactions, and his own legal research, Sierra listened without interruption. She asked clarifying questions, offered emotional support, and never once suggested that this wasn't her problem to help solve. "What do you need from me?" Sierra asked when Dylan finished his explanation. The question was everything Dylan hadn't dared to hope for, and exactly what he most needed to hear. Not an escape plan or a graceful exit strategy, but an offer of partnership in facing whatever came next. "I need you to help me figure out what's best for the girls," Dylan said. "I need someone who can think clearly when I'm too angry and scared to see straight. You need a partner?" Sierra finished gently. "Yes," Dylan said, realizing that was exactly what he needed, and exactly what Sierra was offering to be. But even as relief flooded through him, Dylan couldn't quite silence the voice in his head that whispered warnings about asking too much too soon from someone who had no legal obligation to weather this storm with them. Neither of them could know that Melissa's reappearance would test every assumption they'd made about their relationship, forcing them to decide whether their love was strong enough to weather the kind of crisis that destroyed many families, even ones built on much stronger foundations than theirs. The real test was just beginning. Jane Morrison had been watching her matchmaking success story unfold for 5 months, with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been spectacularly vindicated. From her office at Carson Marketing, she'd received regular updates about dinner dates, family activities, and the gradual integration of Sierra into the Grant household routine. Everything had been progressing exactly as Jane had hoped when she first insisted that Dylan and Sierra were perfect for each other. So when Sierra called, her Friday morning voice tight with stress and urgency, Jane immediately cleared her schedule. "I need to talk to someone," Sierra said without preamble. "Can you meet for lunch? It's important." 2 hours later, they sat across from each other at Meredith's Garden Cafe, a quiet restaurant where they'd shared countless conversations about work relationships and life decisions over the years. But this conversation felt different from the beginning, charged with the kind of tension that preceded major life changes. "Melissa Hart called," Dylan, Sierra said, without bothering with small talk. "She wants back into the girls' lives." Jane's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Melissa Hart as in famous actress, Melissa Hart as in the woman who abandoned 3 babies and hasn't contacted them in 7 years. The same one, Sierra confirmed, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke to sleepless nights and racing thoughts. "She video called the house yesterday morning." The girls answered before Dylan could stop them. "It was traumatic, doesn't begin to cover it." Jane set down her coffee and leaned forward, her expression shifting from casual lunch companion to fierce protector mode. Jane had known Dylan during his early single-parenting days, had watched him struggle through those first impossible months when he was running on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination to be everything his daughters needed. "What does she want specifically?" Jane asked. Visitation, custody. Modification, media rehabilitation. She claims she wants to be their mother, Sierra said, air quotes, emphasizing her skepticism. Dylan thinks it's connected to her new marriage. Apparently, she's engaged to some director who wants kids, and maybe having a relationship with her existing children makes her look like mother material. Jane's jaw tightened with the protective anger that came from watching someone you cared about being threatened by circumstances beyond their control. She'd been there for Dylan's breakdown after Melissa left had helped him navigate those first terrifying weeks of solo parenting when he'd called her crying because he couldn't figure out how to feed 3 babies simultaneously. How are the girls handling it? Jane asked. Luna cried for an hour, Sierra said, her voice catching slightly. Aria went completely silent and spent the evening reorganizing her bookshelf with robotic precision. Nova took apart every mechanical toy in her room and couldn't put any of them back together. And Dylan. Dylan is terrified that he's going to lose them, Sierra said simply. Not physically necessarily, but emotionally. He's convinced that exposure to Melissa's glamorous lifestyle will make them dissatisfied with their life here, that they'll want to spend time in Hollywood with their famous mother instead of in suburban Pennsylvania with their exhausted father. Jane studied Sierra's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. How are you handling it? Sierra was quiet for a long moment, staring out to the window at families walking past on the sidewalk. Parents pushing strollers, children skipping beside their guardians, the everyday tableau of domestic life that suddenly felt fragile and precious. I'm scared, Sierra admitted finally. Not of Melissa exactly, but of what this means for my relationship with Dylan and the girls. I love them, Jane. All 4 of them. I love having dinner with them every night, helping with homework being part of their bedtime routine. I love the way Luna saves her best rocks to show me, and how Nova explains her inventions like I'm a fellow scientist, and the way Aria asks my opinion about books like my thoughts matter. Those things aren't going to change, Jane said gently. Aren't they? Sierra's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been abandoned before and couldn't quite believe in permanence. What if custody arrangements mean the girls spend half their time in Los Angeles? What if Dylan decides that a relationship with someone outside the family is too complicated when he's dealing with legal battles and co-parenting disputes? What if I'm just a temporary comfort until he figures out how to handle this crisis alone? Jane reached across the table and covered Sierra's hands with her own. Sierra, honey, you're spiraling. Dylan is not Marcus. He's not going to abandon you because life got complicated. How can you be so sure? Because I've watched the way he looks at you, Jane said firmly. I've seen how the girls light up when you walk through their front door. I've heard him talk about future plans that include you without even realizing he's doing it. This family has made space for you in their hearts, not just their schedule. Before Sierra could respond, Jane's phone buzzed with a text message that made her expression shift to something more complicated. What is it? Sierra asked, noting the change in Jane's demeanor. It's from Mrs. Patterson, Jane said, referring to Dylan's elderly neighbor who had become an honorary grandmother to the Grant girls. She wants to talk to me about the Melissa situation. Apparently, word is spreading through Dylan's support network. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had been watching the Grant family navigate single parenthood from her kitchen window for 7 years. At 78, she possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from raising 5 children of her own and the fierce protectiveness that developed when you watched a young man learn to be both mother and father to 3 grieving babies. She'd been hanging laundry in her backyard Friday morning when she heard Luna sobbing through the open windows of the Grant house. By the time Dylan left for work, looking haggard and older than his 33 years, Mrs. Patterson had already formulated a battle plan. Jane, dear Mrs. Patterson said when Jane called her back that afternoon. I need to know what we're dealing with. Is that woman serious about wanting custody? Jane found herself smiling despite the gravity of the situation. Mrs. Patterson's use of "we" was exactly the kind of community support Dylan would need to weather whatever Melissa had planned. "I think she's serious about something," Jane replied. "Whether it's actually motherhood or just good publicity remains to be seen." "Well, I've been keeping records," Mrs. Patterson announced, with the satisfaction of someone whose suspicious nature had finally proven useful. 7 years of documentation about Dylan's parenting the girls' school performance, their emotional development, their social connections. If this goes to court, I want them to understand exactly what kind of father would be affected by any custody change. Mrs. Patterson's documentation was more comprehensive than Jane had expected. Photo albums full of images from school events where Dylan was the only single parent in attendance. Copies of thank you notes from teachers praising his involvement in classroom activities. Medical records showing consistent pediatric care and up-to-date vaccinations. Report cards demonstrating academic excellence and social adjustment. "This man has been everything to those girls," Mrs. Patterson said, spreading the evidence across her kitchen table like a lawyer preparing for trial. "Father, mother, cheerleader, teacher, protector. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. He takes them to daddy-daughter dances even though he's terrible at dancing. He sits through every school play, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference with the kind of attention that makes other parents feel guilty about their own level of involvement." Jane studied the photographs Mrs. Patterson had collected, seeing Dylan's evolution from terrified new single parent to confident father. In the early pictures, he looked overwhelmed and exhausted, but his love for his daughters was evident in every image. As the photos progressed through the years, his confidence grew, but his devotion never wavered. "What about Sierra?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "How is she handling this development?" "She's scared," Jane admitted, "worried that she's not equipped to handle this level of family drama." Mrs. Patterson made a sound that conveyed her opinion of that particular concern. "That girl has been the best thing to happen to this family since I started babysitting those children. Dylan hasn't looked this happy since before Melissa left. The girls adore her. If she thinks she can walk away now because things got complicated, she needs to understand what's at stake." That evening, Mrs. Patterson appeared at the Grant front door with a casserole dish and a determined expression. Dylan answered the door looking like he hadn't slept in days, his hair disheveled, and his eyes carrying the weight of someone trying to solve an impossible problem. "Mrs. Patterson, you didn't need to." "Nonsense," she interrupted, pushing past him, with the efficiency of someone who had been managing family crises since before Dylan was born. "You need feeding and those girls need normalcy. Where's Sierra?" "She's at her apartment," Dylan said, accepting the casserole with the resignation of someone whose neighbors refused to accept polite deflection. She needed some time to think. Mrs. Patterson's expression sharpened with concern. Time to think about what Dylan sank onto his couch, suddenly looking every one of his 33 years plus several more. About whether she wants to be involved in whatever mess this becomes. About whether dating a single father is worth the complications that come with custody battles and famous ex-wives and 3 traumatized children. "Did she tell you she was reconsidering your relationship?" Mrs. Patterson asked, settling into the armchair across from him with the determination of someone preparing for a long conversation. "No, but—" "Then you're borrowing trouble," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "That girl loves you and she loves those children. I've watched her with your family for months, Dylan. I've seen how she looks at you, how the girls respond to her, how naturally she fits into your routine. You can't let fear of what might happen destroy what actually exists." Before Dylan could respond, the sound of 3 pairs of footsteps thundering down the stairs announced the girls' arrival. They appeared in the living room doorway, wearing matching pajamas and identical expressions of curiosity about Mrs. Patterson's unexpected visit. "Are you here because of the phone call?" Aria asked with the directness that characterized all her interactions. "Because Daddy called the lady who helps with legal things, and we heard him using his worried voice. Mrs. Patterson opened her arms, and all three girls immediately gravitated toward her, settling on the couch on either side of her with the unconscious seeking of comfort the children displayed when their world felt unstable. "I'm here because you're my girls, and I love you," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "When people we love are worried, we show up to help." "Are we going to have to live with the lady on TV?" Luna asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I don't know, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson said honestly. "But I do know that your daddy will fight for what's best for you, and you have lots of people who love you and want to help. Will Sierra still want to be our friend if we have to visit our birth mom?" Nova asked, her scientific mind cutting straight to the heart of her deepest concern. The question hung in the air, highlighting the fear that none of them had been willing to voice directly. Would Sierra's love prove strong enough to weather this storm? Or would this crisis reveal that their relationship was built on the kind of conditional foundation that crumbled under pressure? Mrs. Patterson looked at Dylan, recognizing the same fear in his eyes that echoed in his daughter's question. "That," she said firmly, "is something we should ask Sierra directly. And I think we should ask her together as a family." Meanwhile, across town in her quiet apartment, Sierra sat on her couch, surrounded by photo albums Dylan's daughters had made for her over the past few months. Pictures of their Sunday painting sessions, ticket stubs from the Science Museum drawings they'd created specifically for her refrigerator. Evidence of a life she'd built with people who had chosen to love her, who had made space for her in their complicated, beautiful world. Her phone buzzed with messages from Jane, Mrs. Patterson, and Dylan, each offering different perspectives on the crisis they were facing. But it was a text from Luna that made Sierra's decision for her. "Can you come home? We miss you and Daddy says you're thinking, but we need you to think here with us. Home." Luna had called Dylan's house Sierra's home. Sierra grabbed her keys, knowing with absolute certainty that home was exactly where she needed to be, crisis or no crisis. Because families didn't abandon each other when life got complicated, they gathered together and figured out solutions. The Grant family was about to discover that love multiplied rather than divided when shared, and that the community they'd built around their unconventional unit was stronger than any challenge one absent parent could present. 6 weeks after Melissa's disruptive phone call, Sierra found herself standing in her apartment bedroom at 6:30 a.m., staring at a suitcase that had been packed and unpacked 3 times in the past hour. The practical voice in her head insisted she was moving too fast, taking too big a risk, crossing boundaries that couldn't be uncrossed. But the louder voice of her heart reminded her that she'd been spending every night at Dylan's house for the past month, leaving each morning to return to an apartment that no longer felt like home. Just for a few weeks, she said aloud to her reflection in the mirror, testing the words to see if they sounded convincing. A trial period to see how it works with everything so unsettled. But even as she spoke, the words Sierra knew this was about more than temporary convenience. This was about choosing to be part of whatever came next, legal battles and custody arrangements, and the messy, complicated work of building a family from love rather than biology. Dylan had asked her to move in the previous Sunday evening, after a particularly difficult day that had started with Luna having nightmares about the TV lady coming to take her away, and ended with all 3 girls refusing to let Sierra go home to her apartment. "We need you here," Dylan had said simply. Exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Not just for me, but for them. You've become their security blanket through all of this chaos." "Dylan, we've only been dating for 6 months," Sierra had replied, though her heart was already saying yes to the possibility of waking up in his house every morning, of being present for homework struggles and bedtime routines and ordinary Tuesday evening dinners. "I know it's fast," Dylan had acknowledged. "I know it's probably crazy to ask you to move in with 4 people while we're dealing with custody lawyers and possible media attention. But Sierra, I can't imagine handling any of this without you anymore. now zipping the suitcase closed with a sense of finality that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Sierra realized that somewhere over the past month of crisis management and family meetings with attorneys, her relationship with Dylan had transformed from dating to partnership. They'd moved beyond the careful courtship phase into the practical intimacy of shared responsibility, joint decision-making, and the kind of trust that developed when you weathered storms together. She arrived at the Grant house as the morning chaos was reaching its usual crescendo. Luna couldn't find her science project on rock formations. Nova had taken apart the coffee maker to see how it worked and couldn't reassemble it, and Arya was practicing a presentation about planetary atmospheres that required costume changes between each planet's description. Sierra, three voices called in unison when she walked through the front door with her suitcase. "Are you staying forever now?" Luna asked, abandoning her search for the missing science project to wrap her arms around Sierra's waist. "Are you moving in officially?" Nova inquired with scientific precision while holding coffee maker parts in both hands. "Does this mean you're going to be here for breakfast every morning?" Arya wanted to know, pausing in her transition from Venus to Mars. Sierra looked over their heads to find Dylan standing in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, wearing an expression that combined hope, gratitude, and the kind of vulnerable relief that came from no longer having to carry everything alone. "Yes," Sierra said, answering all of their questions simultaneously. "I'm moving in officially, which means I'll be here for breakfast every morning, and hopefully forever, if you'll have me." The girls erupted in cheers that probably woke the entire neighborhood, but Sierra only had eyes for Dylan's face, watching, as the tension he'd been carrying for weeks finally began to ease. What followed was a week of adjustment that tested everyone's patience and flexibility. Sierra had to learn the intricate rhythm of the Grant household morning routine, which operated with military precision, born of years of single-parent necessity. Dylan had to adjust to sharing domestic responsibilities with someone whose methods didn't always align with his established approaches. The girls had to navigate the shift from Sierra as frequent visitor to Sierra as permanent family member. The first major conflict arose over something as mundane as laundry sorting. "I've been doing their laundry a specific way for 7 years, Dylan said more defensively than he'd intended, as Sierra attempted to help with the never-ending mountain of clothes that accumulated in a household of 4 people. "I'm not criticizing your method," Sierra replied, though her tone suggested she was working to remain patient. "I'm just trying to help. But if you prefer to handle it alone—" "That's not what I meant," Dylan interrupted, running his hands through his hair in the gesture Sierra recognized as his signal of maximum stress. "It's just that changing routines confuses them, and with everything else they're dealing with right now—" Dylan, Sierra said, gently setting down the shirt she'd been folding and turning to face him fully. "I'm not trying to replace your approaches. I'm trying to become part of them. But if you can't handle sharing responsibility, maybe I should go back to my apartment until you figure out what you actually want." The threat of her leaving even temporarily made Dylan realize how much his fear of losing control was jeopardizing the partnership he desperately wanted. For 7 years, his competence as a parent had been measured by his ability to handle everything himself. Accepting help meant admitting that his solo approach, while functional, wasn't necessarily optimal. "I'm sorry," Dylan said, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking up at Sierra with the kind of honesty that only came from recognizing your own self-defeating behavior. "You're right. I've been micromanaging because maintaining control feels like the only way to protect them. But I asked you to move in because I want to share this life with you, not because I want a housekeeper who follows my specific instructions." Sierra sat beside him, taking his hand and intertwining their fingers with deliberate gentleness. "Dylan, you've done an incredible job raising these girls alone. I'm not here to fix what's broken. I'm here to help make what's already beautiful even better." That conversation marked a turning point in their cohabitation experiment. Dylan began actively seeking Sierra's input on household decisions, while Sierra made an effort to understand and respect the routines that had kept the Grant family stable through years of single-parent challenges. The girls adapted to the new dynamic with the resilience that children possessed when changes were motivated by love rather than crisis. They delighted in having Sierra available for homework help at any hour, bedtime story backup, when Dylan was handling work calls, and the kind of maternal presence they'd never experienced but instinctively craved. "It's like having a mom, but better," Luna confided to Sierra one evening as they organized her rock collection by color and texture. "Because you chose to love us instead of just having to love us because we're related." The observation was so profound and heartbreaking that Sierra had to excuse herself to the bathroom for a moment of private crying that was equal parts joy and grief joy for being chosen by these remarkable children, grief for all the years they'd spent without the maternal nurturing they deserved. But the most significant adjustment came in Dylan and Sierra's romantic relationship, which had to evolve to accommodate the reality of living together with 3 perceptive children who monitored every interaction for signs of stability or discord. "We need to talk about boundaries," Sierra said one evening after the girls were in bed, finding Dylan in the kitchen doing his nightly ritual of preparing the next day's lunches. "About how we handle disagreements, about physical affection, about the fact that 3 little girls are watching our every move to determine whether you're happy and whether I'm staying." Dylan paused in his sandwich construction, recognizing the seriousness of the conversation. "What specifically are you concerned about?" "I'm concerned that they see us as a unit now," Sierra said, leaning against the counter beside him. "Which is wonderful, but it also means that any conflict between us becomes a threat to their sense of security. We can't just fight and make up like a normal couple. We have to think about how our relationship dynamics affect their emotional stability." The weight of that responsibility settled over both of them like a heavy blanket. Normal relationship growing pains became fraught with additional meaning when 3 children's sense of family security depended on the adults in their lives maintaining harmony. "So what do we do?" Dylan asked. "Pretend we'll never disagree. Walk on eggshells to maintain the illusion of perfect partnership." "We learn to argue productively," Sierra replied. "We model healthy conflict resolution. We show them that people who love each other can disagree without threatening the relationship's foundation." The opportunity to test this philosophy came sooner than expected when Dylan made a unilateral decision about the girls' response to Melissa's continued attempts at contact without consulting Sierra first. "You blocked her from their school directory without discussing it with me?" Sierra asked that Thursday evening, her voice carefully controlled but clearly indicating substantial frustration. She was calling the school trying to get information about their daily schedules. Dylan replied, his defensiveness immediate and automatic. "I had to protect them. I'm not questioning the decision itself," Sierra clarified, aware that 3 pairs of ears were probably listening from the top of the stairs. "I'm questioning why you made it without talking to me first when I've been helping you navigate this situation for weeks." Dylan's jaw tightened with the familiar resistance to sharing control that Sierra was learning to recognize as his deepest challenge. "Because they're my daughters and my responsibility. Because I've been protecting them since before you were part of our lives." The words hit Sierra like a slap, highlighting the fundamental insecurity that lived beneath her growing confidence in their relationship. Was she truly a partner in this family, or just a helpful addition who could be dismissed when real decisions needed to be made? "You're right," Sierra said, her voice steady, despite the hurt flooding her chest. "They are your daughters and your responsibility. But if I'm just here to provide domestic support without being consulted on decisions that affect the family I'm now living with, then maybe I misunderstood what moving in together was supposed to mean." The argument that followed was their first real fight as live-in partners, conducted in controlled voices that wouldn't carry upstairs, but expressing genuine hurt and fundamental disagreements about decision-making authority and relationship roles. "I don't know how to do this." Dylan finally exploded, though, quietly. I don't know how to balance protecting them with including you in decisions. I don't know how to be their father and your partner, and make sure everybody's needs get met without somebody getting hurt. Sierra looked at the man she loved, recognizing the fear beneath his anger. Dylan wasn't trying to exclude her. He was drowning in the complexity of adding romantic partnership to single parenthood while dealing with external threats to his family's stability. Dylan, Sierra said softly, moving closer to him and taking his hands despite the tension between them. You don't have to figure this out alone anymore. That's what partnership means. We make these decisions together, we protect them together, we mess up and figure it out together. The resolution came slowly through conversation that stretched past midnight as they established protocols for joint decision-making, defined Sierra's role in parenting decisions, and acknowledged the learning curve involved in transforming from single parent to co-parent practically overnight. But the real test of their new dynamic came the following week when all three girls fell ill with stomach flu, simultaneously transforming their household into a chaos of fever management laundry cycles and the kind of parental tag-team effort that revealed the true strength of their partnership. I've got Luna Dylan called from the upstairs bathroom where he was helping his youngest daughter through another bout of nausea. Nova's asking for you, Sierra replied from the girls' bedroom, where she was taking temperatures and dispensing medication with the competence that came from her years of working with children. How's Aria? Dylan asked when they passed in the hallway during one of many trips to the washing machine. Better. Reading again, which is always a good sign with her. They moved through the crisis with natural coordination, each anticipating the other's needs, sharing the emotional and physical labor of caring for sick children without competition or resentment. When Luna asked for Dylan during the night, Sierra handed her over without feeling displaced. When Nova wanted Sierra to read to her, Dylan felt grateful rather than threatened. By the time all three girls were recovered and back to school, something fundamental had shifted in their household dynamic. Dylan found himself naturally consulting Sierra about decisions both large and small, while Sierra took initiative in areas that needed attention without waiting for explicit permission. I think we're figuring it out, Dylan said one evening as they collapsed onto the couch after a successful day of homework assistance, dinner preparation, and bedtime routine management. I think we are, Sierra agreed, settling against his side with the contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. But neither of them knew that their trial period of domestic harmony was about to be tested by developments that would challenge every assumption they'd made about their ability to weather external storms together. The calm they'd achieved was about to be shattered by forces beyond their control in ways that would determine whether their love was strong enough to survive the kind of crisis that destroyed even the most committed families. The phone call that changed everything came at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. Pulling Dylan from deep sleep with the jarring persistence that only emergency calls possessed. Sierra stirred beside him as he fumbled for his phone, her warm presence a comfort he'd grown dependent on over the past 2 months of living together. Dylan. It's my attorney, came the voice of Patricia Hendricks, the family law specialist Dylan had retained after Melissa's first contact attempt. I know it's late, but I just received some documents that require immediate discussion. Melissa Hart has filed for modified custody arrangements. She's requesting shared custody of the girls, effective immediately. Dylan sat up so abruptly that Sierra was instantly awake, her hand finding his back in the darkness, with the automatic comfort of someone who'd learned to recognize crisis from the change in his breathing patterns. What does that mean exactly? Dylan asked, though his stomach was already dropping with the certainty that whatever Patricia was about to explain would shatter the stability they'd worked so hard to build. It means she's not requesting gradual reintroduction or supervised visits, Patricia replied, her voice carrying the gravity of someone delivering life-altering news. She's asking for a custody arrangement where the girls spend alternating weeks with each parent. She's claiming that her personal growth and financial stability make her equally capable of primary parenting, and that the girls have a right to relationship with their biological mother. Dylan felt the room spin around him as the implications hit like physical blows. Shared custody meant losing his daughters for half their childhood. It meant disrupting the life they'd built together, the routines that had kept them stable, the sense of security that had taken 7 years to establish. It meant Sierra becoming part of a family that might only exist half the time. What are our chances of fighting this successfully? Dylan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer from Patricia's tone. She's hired one of the most expensive family law firms in California, Patricia said. They're arguing that denying the girls' relationship with their biological mother constitutes emotional harm, that Dylan's resistance to contact demonstrates his inability to prioritize the children's best interests over his own resentment. That's complete. Dylan started, then stopped, aware that Sierra was listening to every word and that his daughters were sleeping just down the hall. I know, Patricia said, but from a legal standpoint, they have some compelling arguments. Melissa's career success, her financial resources, her claim of personal growth through therapy, her new marriage to someone who wants to be a stepfather. It creates a picture of a reformed woman who deserves a second chance at motherhood. After hanging up, Dylan sat in the darkness of his bedroom, feeling the weight of crisis settling over him like a suffocating blanket. 7 years of devoted single parenting. 7 years of being everything his daughters needed. 7 years of building a life that worked, all of it threatened by someone who'd abandoned them as babies and now wanted to waltz back in because it suited her current life narrative. Dylan Sierra's voice was soft in the darkness. Talk to me. What can I do? The question was everything Dylan needed to hear and nothing he felt capable of accepting. How could he ask Sierra to help him fight for custody of children who might end up living in Los Angeles half the time? How could he expect her to invest emotionally in a family that might be torn apart by legal proceedings beyond their control? I don't know, Dylan said honestly. I don't know what anyone can do. If the court decides that shared custody serves the girls' best interests, then that's what happens regardless of what we want. Sierra was quiet for a long moment, and Dylan could feel her processing the implications of what custody modification would mean for their relationship, their living situation, the future they'd been tentatively building together. What do the girls know about what's happening? Sierra asked finally. Nothing specific about legal proceedings, Dylan replied. But they know something's wrong. They've been asking why I've been making so many phone calls to lawyers, why I get quiet when certain topics come up. We need to tell them something, Sierra said. Kids always know when the adults in their lives are hiding important information. It makes them more anxious than the truth would. Dylan looked at the woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word, recognizing that her instinct to include herself in difficult family decisions no longer surprised him. Somewhere over the past 2 months, Sierra had stopped being someone who helped with his daughters and become someone who helped raise them. You're right, Dylan said, but I don't know how to explain that their mother who abandoned them as babies now wants shared custody without making them feel like they're being forced to choose sides. The conversation they had with the girls the next evening was one of the most difficult discussions Dylan had ever navigated as a parent. All 3 girls sat on the living room couch, their faces serious, as they sensed the gravity of what their father needed to tell them. You know that your biological mother, Melissa, has been trying to contact you, Dylan began carefully. What you don't know is that she's asked a judge to decide whether you should spend time living with her, in addition to living here with me. The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan watched his daughters' faces cycle through confusion, fear, and something that looked like betrayal as they processed the possibility that their stable life might be subject to someone else's decisions. Would we have to go? Arya asked finally. Her voice smaller than Dylan had heard it in months. I don't know yet, Dylan said honestly. A judge will listen to lawyers from both sides and decide what they think is best for you. But we don't want to leave, Nova said, her scientific mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. This is our home. You're our dad. Sierra is... She looked at Sierra with eyes that pleaded for reassurance that couldn't be given. Sierra is part of our family. Luna finished, her lower lip trembling with the effort of not crying. What happens to Sierra if we have to go live with the TV lady? The question hung in the air like a challenge, highlighting the fear that none of them had been willing to voice directly. What happened to the family they'd built if external forces tore apart its foundation? Sierra looked at 3 faces turned toward her, with desperate hope at Dylan's expression of barely controlled panic, and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Listen to me, Sierra said, moving to sit on the coffee table so she could face all 3 girls directly. No matter what happens with courts and judges and custody arrangements, I am not going anywhere. If you have to spend time in Los Angeles, I'll be here when you come home. If you need someone to talk to about how you're feeling, I'll always answer your phone calls. If you miss home while you're away, I'll remind you of all the reasons you're loved. But what if the judge says we have to live there most of the time? Arya pressed, needing specific reassurances about specific fears. Then Daddy and I will figure out how to maintain your connection to this home and this family, no matter where you are, Sierra replied, with a conviction that surprised even her. Because families aren't just about living in the same house. Families are about loving each other enough to stay connected across any distance. The girls absorbed this promise with the seriousness of children who understood they were witnessing something important about the nature of commitment and love. But even as Sierra made these promises, she was acutely aware that she had no legal standing to enforce them. If Melissa gained custody and decided that Sierra's influence was unwelcome, there would be nothing to stop her from cutting off contact entirely. The legal proceedings that followed moved with the grinding inevitability of a system designed to prioritize children's theoretical best interests over their actual emotional needs. Melissa's legal team painted Dylan as a man whose protective instincts had become possessive control, while portraying their client as a woman who had grown beyond the mistakes of her youth and deserved the opportunity to mother the children she'd given birth to. She looks good on paper, Patricia admitted during one of their strategy sessions. Stable marriage, substantial income, evidence of therapy and personal growth, a lifestyle that could provide the girls with opportunities. Dylan can't match financially. But she abandoned them. Dylan said, his voice tight with frustration. She walked away when they were babies and had no contact for 7 years. How does that not matter? It matters, Patricia assured him. But her lawyers are arguing that young people make mistakes, that denying her the chance to correct those mistakes punishes the children as much as it punishes her. Sierra found herself in the strange position of having no official role in proceedings that would determine the future of the family she'd become essential to. She couldn't testify about the girls' emotional well-being, couldn't provide legal evidence of their happiness and stability, couldn't officially advocate for maintaining the life they'd built together. But what she could do was research everything possible about Melissa Hart's current life, looking for evidence that might support Dylan's case for maintaining primary custody. Look at this, Sierra said one evening, laptop open on the kitchen table after the girls had gone to bed. Melissa's social media posts from the past year. Constant travel for work parties, red carpet events, a lifestyle that involves being away from home for weeks at a time. Dylan leaned over her shoulder to study the screen, seeing images of Melissa at film premieres, vacation destinations, industry parties, a life that looked glamorous but hardly stable enough for full-time parenting of 3 school-age children. Her engagement announcement mentions her fiancé's desire to blend their families, Sierra continued. But he has 2 teenagers from his previous marriage who live with their mother most of the time. There's no evidence that either of them has recent experience with hands-on parenting of younger children. As they compiled evidence and prepared for court proceedings, Sierra and Dylan found their relationship tested in ways they'd never anticipated. The stress of potential family dissolution, combined with the financial strain of legal fees and the emotional exhaustion of supporting 3 anxious children, created pressure that revealed both the strengths and weaknesses in their partnership. "I can't ask you to put your life on hold while we fight this," Dylan said one evening after a particularly brutal strategy session with their attorney. "You didn't sign up to date someone whose ex-wife could disrupt your entire future with legal proceedings." "Stop," Sierra said firmly, turning away from the dinner dishes she'd been washing with aggressive precision. "Stop trying to give me escape routes. Stop assuming I'm looking for reasons to leave. I moved in here because I want to be part of this family, and that includes the difficult parts." But late at night, when Dylan was finally asleep and the house was quiet, Sierra found herself staring at the ceiling and wondering what she was fighting for. If Melissa won shared custody, would Sierra become a part-time participant in a part-time family? Would Dylan still want a live-in partner if his daughters were only home half the time? And if Melissa lost her custody bid, would Dylan always be looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next legal challenge, the next disruption to the stability they'd worked so hard to build? The answers to those questions would determine not just the future of Dylan's relationship with his daughters, but the future of the unconventional family that had formed around love rather than biology, choice rather than obligation, and hope rather than fear. The court date was set for 3 weeks away, and everything they'd built together hung in the balance. The morning of the custody hearing arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed to mock the chaos about to unfold in their lives. Sierra woke before her alarm, finding Dylan already gone from the bed they'd shared for the past 3 months. She found him in the kitchen at 5:30 a.m., dressed in his best suit, staring at a cup of coffee he'd clearly forgotten to drink. "How long have you been awake?" Sierra asked, moving to stand beside him at the window that looked out on the backyard where 3 little girls had played just yesterday, their laughter echoing through the morning air like a promise that this day would never come. "I don't think I slept." Dylan admitted, his voice carrying the hollowed-out quality that came from weeks of anxiety and anticipation. "I keep running through Patricia's preparation sessions, trying to remember what to say if they ask about my work schedule, about dating relationships, about whether I can provide the same financial opportunities Melissa can offer." Sierra studied Dylan's profile, noting the new lines around his eyes, the tension that had become permanent in his shoulders since the custody petition arrived. He'd lost weight, forgotten to eat meals, thrown himself into legal preparation with the desperate intensity of someone whose entire world was threatened. "The girls don't know today's the day, do they?" Sierra asked, though she already knew the answer from the careful way Dylan had avoided mentioning the court date around his daughters. "They think I have meetings about work," Dylan said. "I couldn't bear to tell them that strangers would be deciding whether they get to keep living in the only home they remember." The decision to shield the girls from the specific timing of court proceedings had been made jointly, but Sierra wondered now if it had been the right choice. Children often sensed when adults were lying about important things, and the Grant girls had been watching their father with increasing worry as his stress became impossible to hide. "I should get them up for school," Dylan said, checking his watch with the mechanical precision of someone trying to maintain normal routine in the face of life-altering uncertainty. "I'll do it," Sierra offered. "You finish getting ready. Remember what Patricia said, the judge will be looking at your demeanor, your confidence, your ability to remain calm under pressure." But as Sierra headed upstairs to wake 3 sleeping children who had no idea their lives might be completely different by evening, she wondered how anyone was supposed to project calm confidence when everything they loved hung in the balance. The girls sensed something unusual in the household energy immediately. Luna clung to Sierra during breakfast, refusing to let go, even when it was time to gather backpacks and head for the school bus. Nova peppered her father with questions about his work meetings that were too specific, and concerned for a 7-year-old's typical curiosity. Arya watched everyone with the analytical intensity that meant she was trying to solve a puzzle the adults weren't admitting existed. "Daddy seems different today," Arya said to Sierra as they waited for the school bus, her voice low enough that Dylan couldn't hear from where he stood by the front door. "He's worried about work," Sierra replied, hating the partial truth, but not knowing how to explain that their father was about to fight for the right to keep being their primary parent. "Are you and Daddy okay?" Nova asked, her scientific mind connecting Dylan's stress to changes in his relationship with Sierra. "You've been talking in quiet voices a lot lately." Sierra knelt down to Nova's level, meeting her eyes with as much honesty as she could provide. "Daddy and I are fine. He's just dealing with some complicated grown-up things right now. But no matter what happens with his work, stress, I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" Luna whispered, her small hand finding Sierra's with the desperate need for reassurance that had characterized her behavior for weeks. "Promise," Sierra said, hoping desperately that it was a promise she'd be able to keep. After the girls left for school, Sierra and Dylan drove to the courthouse in silence that felt heavy with all the things they couldn't say. Dylan gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles while Sierra stared out the passenger window at ordinary people living ordinary Tuesday mornings, unaware that someone else's entire world was about to be decided by strangers in legal robes. The courthouse was everything Sierra had expected and nothing she was prepared for. Marble halls echoed with the sound of urgent conversations between lawyers and clients. Families clustered together on benches looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The overwhelming sense that life-changing decisions were being made behind closed doors by people who would never have to live with the consequences. Melissa Hart arrived with an entourage that looked like a movie premiere delegation. Her legal team consisted of 4 attorneys in expensive suits, a public relations consultant, and what appeared to be a life coach, whose job was to help her project maternal warmth for the judge's benefit. Melissa herself was stunning in the way that only professional styling and Hollywood makeup could achieve, wearing her outfit that managed to look both sophisticated and appropriately maternal. Sierra felt underdressed and irrelevant standing beside Dylan in his off-the-rack suit and nervous energy. But more than inadequately dressed, she felt helpless, watching the woman who had abandoned 3 babies, preparing to charm a judge into believing she deserved shared custody of children she'd never actually parented. "She looks good," Dylan said quietly, his voice carrying resignation alongside fear. "She looks like she's playing a role," Sierra replied, recognizing the performative quality of Melissa's demeanor, the way she seemed to be constantly aware of being observed and judged. Patricia Hendricks arrived with significantly less fanfare, but considerably more confidence in her preparation. Sierra had grown to trust Dylan's attorney over the past weeks, appreciating her straightforward approach and genuine concern for the girls' well-being rather than just legal victory. "How are you holding up, Patricia?" asked Dylan, her assessment sharp and professional. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," Dylan admitted. "Good," Patricia replied unexpectedly. "That means you understand what's at stake. Judges can tell the difference between parents who care deeply and parents who are going through the motions." The hearing itself was nothing like television courtroom dramas. No jury, no dramatic cross-examinations, no moment of revelation that changed everything. Just a judge listening to carefully prepared arguments about what constituted the best interests of the children, while the children in question sat in their elementary school classrooms, unaware that their future was being decided without their input. Melissa's legal team painted a picture of a woman who had made mistakes in her youth, but had grown into someone capable of providing her daughters with opportunities Dylan could never match. They presented evidence of her financial stability, her therapeutic work to address past issues, her new marriage to a man eager to be a stepfather, and her desire to make amends for past mistakes by being the mother her daughters deserved. Hart has created a stable home environment in Los Angeles, her primary attorney argued. She has enrolled the children in excellent private schools, arranged for tutoring and enrichment activities, and created space in her life for full-time parenting. She's asking this court not to punish her daughters for her own past mistakes by denying them the opportunity to know their biological mother. Patricia's counter-argument focused on the stability Dylan had provided, the emotional bonds he'd formed with his daughters, and the potential trauma of disrupting a family structure that had worked successfully for 7 years. Mr. Grant has been these children's sole parent since they were 6 months old, Patricia said. He has created a loving, stable home environment where the girls have thrived academically, socially, and emotionally. They have deep roots in their community, strong relationships with extended family and friends, and a sense of security that comes from consistent, devoted parenting. But as Sierra listened to the legal arguments, she realized with growing dread that the emotional truth of their family's bond might not translate into legal victory. Melissa's financial resources, her ability to provide educational and cultural opportunities, and her biological connection to the girls created a compelling case for shared custody, regardless of the emotional stability Dylan had provided. The judge's questions focused on logistics, school arrangements, transportation between households, holiday schedules, and the practical details of managing shared custody across multiple states. Sierra found herself thinking about Luna's rock collection, Nova's mechanical projects that took weeks to complete, Aria's carefully organized book collection, all the small details of childhood that would be disrupted by constant movement between homes. But the moment that nearly broke Sierra's heart came when the judge asked Dylan directly about his resistance to shared custody arrangements. Mr. Grant, Ms. Hart's legal team has suggested that your opposition to custody modification stems from personal animosity rather than concern for your daughter's well-being. How do you respond to that characterization? Dylan was quiet for a long moment, and Sierra could see him struggling with how to articulate 7 years of protective love without sounding bitter or vindictive. Your Honor, Dylan said finally, I don't hate Melissa. I'm grateful to her for giving me my daughters, even if I wish circumstances had been different. But these girls have never known her as their mother. They've built their entire sense of family and security around the life we've created together. Asking them to suddenly split their time between 2 strangers, because that's what Melissa and I are to each other, now seems like it prioritizes adult desires over children's emotional needs. Mr. Grant, are you suggesting that children shouldn't have the opportunity to know their biological parents? The judge pressed. Sierra watched Dylan's face crumple slightly as he recognized the impossible position he'd been placed in. Any argument against Melissa's custody request could be framed as denying his daughters their right to maternal relationship. I'm suggesting that my daughters are happy, healthy, and secure in the life they have, Dylan said quietly. I'm asking you to consider whether disrupting that stability serves their best interests, or whether it serves the best interests of adults who want to feel better about past choices. The hearing concluded without immediate resolution. The judge announced she would review all evidence and testimony before rendering a decision within 2 weeks, leaving Dylan and Sierra in legal limbo while life-changing determinations were made behind closed doors. Walking out of the courthouse, Sierra felt the weight of uncertainty settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Everything they'd built together, every routine and tradition and shared moment of family life hung in the balance while strangers decided their fate. What happens now? Sierra asked as they sat in Dylan's car in the courthouse parking lot. We wait, Dylan said, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone who had done everything possible and still felt helpless. We wait and try to pretend everything's normal, while a judge decides whether my daughters get to keep the only family they've ever known. That evening, the girls came home from school to find both Dylan and Sierra trying too hard to act like everything was fine. But children who had been monitoring their father's emotional state for weeks couldn't be fooled by forced cheerfulness and overly enthusiastic dinner conversation. "Something happened today," Arya announced during homework time, her statement directed at both adults with the confidence of someone who had solved the puzzle she'd been working on for weeks. "Today was just a regular day?" Sierra replied automatically, the lie feeling heavy on her tongue. "No, it wasn't," Nova said with scientific certainty. "Daddy's been nervous for weeks, and today he's different nervous. Like something'd already happened nervous instead of something might happen nervous." Dylan and Sierra exchanged looks across the kitchen table, realizing that their attempts to protect the girls from adult anxiety had been unsuccessful. "You're right," Dylan said, finally setting down the homework he'd been pretending to help with. "Something did happen today. Something that might change things for our family." The conversation that followed was brutal in its honesty, and necessary in its timing. Dylan explained about the custody hearing, about the possibility that they might have to spend part of their time living with Melissa, about the judge's decision that would affect their entire future. The girls' reactions were exactly what Sierra had feared, and everything she'd tried to protect them from. Luna burst into tears, Arya retreated into angry silence, and Nova began asking rapid-fire questions about logistics that revealed how thoroughly this news disrupted her sense of security and predictability. "But we don't want to live with her," Luna sobbed. "We want to live here with you and Sierra. What if she doesn't like our things?" Nova worried. "What if she makes us throw away my inventions and Luna's rocks and Arya's books? What if she tries to make us call her mom?" Arya asked the question, carrying the weight of someone whose identity was threatened by forced relationship changes. Dylan and Sierra found themselves trying to provide comfort for fears they shared, but couldn't acknowledge reassurance about outcomes they had no power to control and hope about a future that felt increasingly uncertain. That night, after the girls were finally settled, though none of them actually fell asleep easily, Dylan and Sierra lay in bed staring at the ceiling and facing the possibility that everything they'd built together might be torn apart by legal decree. "What if she wins?" Dylan asked into the darkness. "What if the judge decides that shared custody is in their best interests?" Sierra was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the practical implications, but the emotional reality of loving children who might be taken away for half their childhood. "Then we figure out how to make it work," Sierra said finally, though her voice carried uncertainty alongside determination. "We help them adjust, we maintain consistency when they're here, we support them through the transition." "But what about us, Dylan?" asked his voice barely above a whisper. "What about our life together? What about the family we've built?" It was the question Sierra had been avoiding since the custody petition arrived, the fear she'd been pushing down while focusing on legal strategy and emotional support for the girls. "I don't know." Sierra admitted her honesty, feeling like another small heartbreak in a day full of them. "I don't know how we maintain what we have if the foundation of our life together gets disrupted every other week." They lay in the darkness holding hands, two people who loved each other and three children who might be about to learn that love wasn't always enough to overcome legal decisions and biological claims and the complicated intersection of adult choices and children's needs. The decision that would determine their future was still 2 weeks away, but the crisis had already begun to reshape their understanding of what they were fighting for and what they might lose. Neither Dylan nor Sierra could sleep that night, both of them lying awake wondering if this was the beginning of the end of everything they'd worked so hard to build together. The call came on a Thursday morning, exactly 13 days after the custody hearing, while Dylan was making breakfast and trying to pretend his hands weren't shaking every time his phone buzzed. Sierra had left early for a crucial meeting with potential donors for her non-profit, and the girls were finishing their cereal with the subdued energy that had characterized their morning routine since they'd learned about the court proceedings. "Mr. Grant, this is Patricia Hendricks. I have news about the judge's decision." Dylan's heart stopped completely. He gestured frantically for the girls to go upstairs and brush their teeth, needing a moment of privacy for whatever Patricia was about to tell him. "The judge has ruled in favor of maintaining the current custody arrangement," Patricia said, her voice carrying relief and satisfaction. "Melissa's petition for shared custody has been denied." The words hit Dylan like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. His knees nearly buckled with relief so intense it felt like being pulled back from the edge of a cliff. She ruled that disrupting the girls' established family structure would not serve their best interests. Patricia continued. The judge was particularly influenced by the psychological evaluation that showed how well-adjusted and secure the girls are in their current environment. She noted that while Melissa has legal rights as their biological mother, those rights must be balanced against the children's demonstrated need for stability. Dylan slumped against the kitchen counter, years of terror and protective anxiety finally beginning to drain from his shoulders. His daughters would stay home. Their life would remain intact. The family they'd built together wouldn't be torn apart by legal decree. However, Patricia continued, her tone shifting to something more cautious. "The judge has ordered that Melissa be granted supervised visitation rights. 4 hours every other month, with a court-appointed supervisor present. The girls can't be removed from Pennsylvania without your written consent." The compromise was more than Dylan had dared hope for, and less than Melissa had demanded. His daughters would have the opportunity to know their biological mother if they chose, but their primary life would remain stable and secure. After Patricia hung up, Dylan stood alone in his kitchen, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude, and the sudden realization that he needed to share this victory with Sierra immediately. But first he had to tell his daughters that their world would remain exactly as they'd built it together. "Girls," Dylan called upstairs. "Can you come down here? I have something important to tell you." 3 anxious faces appeared at the top of the stairs, their expressions braced for bad news they'd been expecting for 2 weeks. The judge made her decision. Dylan said, unable to keep the smile from spreading across his face. "You get to stay here with me. This is still your home, and I'm still your dad, and nothing is going to change about our family." The explosion of relief that followed was everything Dylan had hoped for, and more than he'd allowed himself to expect. Luna launched herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. Nova whooped with scientific enthusiasm about optimal outcomes achieved. Arya maintained her composure for exactly 3 seconds before dissolving into tears of happiness. "What about Sierra?" Luna asked, her face buried in Dylan's shoulder. "Does Sierra get to stay too?" The question hit Dylan with unexpected force. In his relief about maintaining custody, he'd been focused on preserving their family structure, without considering how much Sierra had become the heart of that structure. The girls weren't just asking about Sierra's continued presence in their home, they were asking whether their family would remain complete. "Sierra gets to stay as long as she wants to," Dylan promised, realizing as he said the words that he wanted to make that promise more permanent than their current living arrangement allowed. By the time Sierra returned that afternoon, Dylan had formulated a plan that was either inspired or completely insane. The girls were in on it immediately, their enthusiasm for matchmaking apparently undimmed by weeks of legal anxiety. "We should do it at Rosewood Cafe," Arya suggested with the confidence of someone whose previous romantic interventions had been wildly successful. "That's where everything started. And we should make signs." Nova added her engineering mind, already designing practical solutions for proposal logistics. "Can we help pick out the ring?" Luna wanted to know, her aesthetic sensibilities requiring involvement in all important family decisions. Dylan found himself laughing with genuine joy for the first time in months. His daughter's immediate assumption that Sierra would say yes, their complete confidence in the strength of their unconventional family, and their enthusiastic support for making their relationship legally permanent, felt like the most natural thing in the world. There's just one problem, Dylan said, attempting to introduce reality into their planning session. Sierra doesn't know about the court decision yet. She's expecting bad news, not a marriage proposal. That makes it even better, Arya said with the wisdom of a 7-year-old who understood that the best surprises were the ones that transformed fear into joy. She'll be so happy that we get to stay a family that she'll definitely say yes to making it official. 3 days later, Dylan stood in Rosewood Cafe at 6 p.m., wearing his best suit and fighting nerves that were somehow both better and worse than his first date anxiety 6 months earlier. The cafe looked different than it had that evening, when 3 little girls had ambushed Sierra with their matchmaking plan. Holiday lights twinkled from the ceiling mistletoe hung over doorways, and the whole space felt magical in the way that December evenings possessed. Jane had been enlisted to get Sierra to the cafe under the pretense of an important discussion about non-profit funding. Sierra's friend had proven to be an excellent co-conspirator, though Dylan suspected Jane's enthusiasm had more to do with witnessing the culmination of her successful matchmaking than helping with romantic logistics. The girls had positioned themselves strategically around the Café Nova, at a corner table with clear sight lines to the entrance, Arya near the counter, where she could signal the staff, and Luna by the window, where her job was to hold the carefully painted sign they'd created together. When Sierra walked through the front door at exactly 7 p.m., her expression cycling from confusion to surprise to dawning comprehension as she spotted Dylan standing beside their old table. Every person in the cafe seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Dylan Sierra's voice carried uncertainty and hope in equal measure. "What's going on?" Jane said she needed to discuss something important about funding, but surprise. 3 voices called in unison, and Luna held up her sign. "Say yes." Sierra's hand flew to her mouth as understanding flooded her face. Other patrons began pulling out their phones, clearly recognizing they were witnessing something special, while the barista behind the counter grinned with the satisfaction of someone who'd been keeping a secret for days. Dylan stepped forward, his nervousness transforming into certainty as he looked at the woman who had become essential to his happiness and integral to his daughter's sense of family completion. Sierra Dylan began, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to say. 6 months ago, my daughters intercepted our first date because they thought their father deserved to be happy. Today they're here again because they want to make sure you know that you're not just someone I love, you're someone we all love. He dropped to one knee, pulling the small velvet box from his pocket, while the cafe fell completely silent around them. The judge ruled in our favor. The girls get to stay home. Our family gets to stay together exactly as we've built it. And I realized that I don't want to spend another day without making it official. Sierra's eyes filled with tears as Dylan opened the ring box, revealing a simple, elegant band that caught the light like captured star fire. I know we haven't been together very long by traditional standards, Dylan continued, but we've already proven that we can weather crises together, that we can build something beautiful from unconventional circumstances, and that love doesn't follow timelines or rule books. Daddy's really nervous, Nova Stage whispered from her table loud enough for everyone to hear. He practiced this speech 17 times. Laughter rippled through the cafe, breaking the tension, while somehow making the moment even more perfect. Sierra Brooks, Dylan said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Will you marry me? Will you legally become part of this crazy, beautiful family we've created? Will you let us love you officially for the rest of our lives? The cafe held its collective breath as Sierra looked at Dylan, then at 3 little girls watching with expressions of hope and absolute certainty. Then back at the man who was offering her everything she'd ever wanted but never dared to believe she deserved. Yes, Sierra whispered, then louder, her voice carrying across the entire restaurant. Yes, of course, yes. The eruption that followed was everything Dylan had hoped for, and more than he'd dared expect. Applause thundered through the cafe as Dylan slid the ring onto Sierra's finger and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promises and felt like coming home. The girls swarmed them immediately, their cheers mixing with the congratulations of strangers who'd been drawn into their love story despite themselves. "We're really going to be a family now," Luna said, wrapping her arms around both adults with fierce satisfaction. "Like official family with papers and everything. The best kind of family." Arya agreed, her analytical mind pleased with the logical conclusion to months of relationship development. The kind that chooses each other. As they stood together in the warm light of Rosewood Cafe, the same place where 3 mischievous children had engineered their first meeting, Sierra realized that her story hadn't ended when Marcus left, or when Dr. Chen delivered devastating news about her fertility. It had been waiting to begin until she found the people who would love her, not despite her limitations, but including them. Outside, snow began to fall in soft, fat flakes that caught the streetlight like blessing made visible. Through the window, other families walked past on evening errands, unaware that inside a small cafe, one unconventional family had just made itself permanent through choice commitment, and the kind of love that didn't require biology to be real. "I can't wait to call you Mom," Nova said, as they gathered their coats to leave her scientific mind already categorizing the changes this engagement would bring to their family structure. "I can't wait for you to call me that," Sierra replied, realizing that the word she'd thought she'd never hear directed at her would be even more meaningful coming from children who chose to give it rather than children who had no other option. As they walked toward Dylan's car, Luna slipped her small hand into Sierra's larger one and looked up with the wisdom that only children possessed about the really important things in life. "This is the best surprise ever," Luna said. "Even better than when we surprised you at the restaurant the first time." "Even better," Sierra agreed, squeezing the small hand in hers and understanding that surprises could transform fear into joy, strangers into family, and broken hearts into something stronger than they'd ever been alone. The future stretched ahead of them, no longer uncertain, but full of possibility, built on the foundation of choosing to love each other every single day. 3 months later, Sierra stood in the bridal suite of Pinehurst Community Center, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror, while 3 junior bridesmaids fussed with her dress, her veil, and every detail of her wedding day appearance with the intense focus that only 7-year-olds could bring to important projects. "Your hair looks perfect," Arya announced, stepping back to assess her handiwork. She'd insisted on helping with Sierra's updo, claiming that her steady hands and attention to detail made her the ideal candidate for bridal hair assistance. "The flowers in your bouquet match your dress exactly," Nova observed with scientific precision, comparing the ivory roses to the silk fabric of Sierra's gown. "Optimal color coordination achieved." "You look like a princess," Luna said softly, her eyes wide with the kind of reverence children reserved for truly magical moments. "The most beautiful princess ever." Sierra smiled at the 3 girls who had become her daughters in everything but legal paperwork. Though that technicality would be resolved immediately after the wedding ceremony, when Dylan had arranged for them to begin adoption proceedings that would make Sierra's role in their lives official and permanent. The dress Sierra wore was simple but elegant, chosen specifically because it would allow her to move easily during the ceremony and reception. After months of legal battles and custody fears, she and Dylan had decided their wedding should be about joy, rather than stress, celebration, rather than performance. "Are you nervous?" Arya asked, studying Sierra's face with the analytical attention she brought to solving complex problems. "Good nervous or scared nervous?" Nova clarified her scientific mind requiring specific emotional data. "Happy nervous," Sierra replied honestly. "The kind of nervous you feel when something wonderful is about to happen, and you can't quite believe you're lucky enough to be part of it. Daddy has the same kind of nervous," Luna reported, having served as spy during her reconnaissance mission to the groom's preparation room. He keeps checking his tie and asking Uncle Michael if his speech is too long. Michael was Dylan's college roommate, who'd flown in from Seattle to serve as best man, the only person Dylan trusted to keep him calm during the final hours before making their relationship legally permanent. Sierra's sister Emma had arrived from Portland to serve as matron of honor, completing a wedding party that prioritized emotional support over traditional balance. The ceremony itself was being held in the same community center where Sierra's non-profit hosted its annual fundraising gala. A space that represented everything she'd built in her professional life while preparing to become part of the family Dylan had built in his personal life. 50 guests filled folding chairs arranged in simple rows, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt like a gathering of tribes rather than a formal wedding. Mrs. Patterson had appointed herself coordinator of all logistical details, arriving at the community center 3 hours early with lists, clipboards, and the kind of organizational efficiency that came from managing large families through decades of holidays and celebrations. Jane had handled decorations with artistic flair that transformed the utilitarian space into something magical without attempting to disguise its fundamental nature. "It's time," Emma announced from the doorway, her smile carrying the emotional complexity of someone watching her sister marry into happiness after years of believing such happiness wasn't possible. "The groom is ready. The guests are seated, and your future father-in-law is pacing like an expectant grandfather." Dylan's father had driven down from Boston for the wedding. A quiet man who'd supported his son through single parenthood with understated devotion and now embraced Sierra with the relief of someone grateful his son had found partnership after years of carrying every burden alone. The processional was deliberately unconventional, designed to reflect the unusual circumstances that had brought their family together. Aria walked first, carrying a basket of rose petals that she scattered with scientific precision. Nova followed, bearing the rings on a pillow she'd decorated with gear designs that somehow managed to look both mechanical and elegant. Luna came last, her basket filled with smooth stones from her collection that guests could take as remembrances of this day when love had been made official. Then Sierra appeared at the back of the room, walking alone by choice rather than tradition. She'd considered asking her father to escort her down the aisle, but something felt right about approaching Dylan independently as a woman, making her own choice about her own future rather than being transferred from one man's care to another's. But halfway down the aisle, Sierra felt small hands slip into hers from both sides. Luna and Aria had abandoned their positions to walk with her toward their father, creating a family processional that no wedding planning book had ever suggested but felt absolutely perfect for the unconventional family they'd become. Dylan stood at the front of the room in his best suit, his expression cycling through joy, gratitude, and wonder as he watched his daughters escort the woman who'd become essential to all their happiness toward the altar, where they would officially become a legal family. The ceremony itself was brief and heartfelt, officiated by Judge Patricia Morrison, Jane's aunt, whose offer to perform the wedding had surprised everyone with its perfect appropriateness. Judge Morrison had witnessed enough family dissolution in her courtroom to appreciate celebrating family formation with genuine enthusiasm. Dylan and Sierra. Judge Morrison began, "You've chosen to gather your families and friends here today, not just to celebrate your love for each other, but to legally formalize the family you've already created through choice commitment and daily acts of love." The vows they exchanged had been written together, promising partnership in parenting support through future challenges and commitment to the 3 children who'd brought them together and would keep them connected for the rest of their lives. "I promise to love your daughters as my own," Sierra said, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise to show up for every school play, every science fair, every moment when they need someone to believe in them. I promise to help you raise them into women who know they are worthy of love that doesn't leave. I promise to trust you with my heart and my children's hearts." Dylan replied, his voice thick with emotion. I promise to share every burden and every joy, to make decisions with you, rather than for you to build our future together, rather than expecting you to fit into the life I'd already created. But the most moving moment came when Judge Morrison addressed the girls, directly acknowledging their role in creating this family and asking if they consented to Sierra becoming their legal stepmother. Do you, Aria Nova and Luna Grant, accept Sierra Brooks as your mother, promising to love her, respect her, and allow her to love and guide you as you grow up? We do. 3 voices answered in unison, their enthusiasm making the formal language unnecessary and beautiful. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Pennsylvania judge, Morrison announced with a smile that transformed her usually stern judicial demeanor, I now pronounce you husband and wife and officially recognize you as a family of 5. Dylan, you may kiss your bride. The kiss that followed was everything Sierra had dreamed of, and more than she'd ever expected. Not just a romantic moment between 2 adults, but a promise sealed in front of the community that had supported them and witnessed by the children who'd made it all possible. The reception was a potluck affair, held in the same room where the ceremony had taken place, with tables of food contributed by friends, neighbors, and Sierra's work colleagues who'd become invested in her happiness. Mrs. Patterson had coordinated the meal planning with military precision, while Jane had handled music selection with an understanding of what would appeal to guests ranging from 7-year-olds to 70-year-olds. Dylan and Sierra's first dance was to a song the girls had chosen, something about family and belonging, that had made them cry when they'd heard it on the radio weeks earlier. But the most magical moment came when the girls joined them on the dance floor, creating a family dance that involved significantly more giggling than traditional choreography. I can't believe we pulled this off, Dylan said, as he spun Sierra around, while Nova hung onto his leg and Luna twirled in circles nearby. I can't believe it's real, Sierra replied, watching Aria attempt to teach Mrs. Patterson the dance moves she'd learned in school. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all an elaborate dream. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave with containers of leftover cake and handfuls of Luna's stones, Sierra found herself standing with Dylan by the windows, overlooking the parking lot where families were loading sleepy children into car seats and saying goodbye with promises to get together soon. No honeymoon? Emma asked, having appointed herself responsible for ensuring her sister's wedding day included all necessary romantic elements. We're having our honeymoon at home, Sierra replied, watching the girls help clean up reception decorations with the kind of ownership that came from feeling completely secure in their family's permanence. We want to wake up tomorrow in our own beds, make breakfast together, and start our married life exactly where we plan to live it. That's perfect, Emma said, understanding that for a family built from crisis and choice, the greatest luxury was ordinary domesticity without external threat or uncertainty. Later that evening, after guests had gone home and decorations had been packed away, the newly official family of 5 gathered in their living room for what Dylan declared the most important tradition of their wedding day hot chocolate and the kind of family meeting that had become essential to their household democracy. So Dylan said, settling onto the couch with Sierra beside him, and 3 girls arranged around them like satellites orbiting their sun. How does it feel to be officially married and officially a family? It feels exactly the same as yesterday, Aria observed with characteristic honesty. Which is perfect because yesterday felt exactly right. The rings are pretty, Nova added, examining the simple bands Dylan and Sierra now wore. And I like that Sierra's last name is going to be Grant now, like ours. Does this mean we can call you Mom now? Luna asked, though she'd been testing the word periodically for weeks with Sierra's enthusiastic encouragement. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Sierra said, pulling Luna onto her lap. Mom, Sierra, stepmom, whatever makes you happy, Mom, Luna said decisively. Definitely Mom, because that's what you are. As they sat together in the warm glow of their living room, surrounded by wedding gifts and the detritus of celebration, Sierra realized that the story she'd thought ended with Marcus's abandonment had actually been waiting to begin. This was her real life, not the one she'd planned with someone who couldn't love her through challenges, but the one she'd built with people who chose her daily and let her choose them in return. Outside, snow continued to fall on the quiet neighborhood, where they'd planted their roots together, covering the world in the kind of peace that came from knowing exactly where you belonged. 2 years later, Sierra stood in the doorway of Rosewood Cafe, one hand resting on her rounded belly, where their 4th daughter was currently practicing gymnastics, watching Dylan attempt to manage 3 excited 8-year-olds who were bouncing with anticipation about their annual anniversary dinner. "This is where it all started," Arya announced to the hostess with the confidence of someone recounting family mythology. "This is where we convinced Sierra to marry our daddy. We didn't convince her," Nova corrected with scientific precision. "We simply facilitated optimal meeting conditions and allowed natural attraction to develop organically. We were excellent matchmakers," Luna added with satisfaction, holding up the small painted rock she'd brought to commemorate this special evening. "The best matchmakers ever." The hostess, the same woman who'd witnessed their chaotic first encounter, smiled with genuine warmth as she led them to a corner table decorated with a small bouquet and a handwritten sign reading, "Happy Anniversary, Grant Family." Sierra marveled at how different this return visit felt from that nerve-wracking evening when 3 determined children had ambushed her blind date with their romantic intervention. Tonight, she moved through the familiar space with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was, surrounded by people who had chosen to love her and had never wavered in that choice. "How's baby sister doing?" Dylan asked, settling beside Sierra and placing his hand over hers on her belly with the gentle reverence that had characterized his approach to her pregnancy from the moment they'd received the surprising news that IVF had been successful on their first attempt. Active Sierra replied, smiling, as a particularly strong kick made her wince slightly. "I think she's excited about dinner out. She's going to love our family," Luna said, with absolute certainty, leaning over to address Sierra's belly directly. "We're going to teach her everything important, how to find the best rocks, how to build robots, how to read about space, and how to make Daddy happy when he gets worried about work." The pregnancy had been a surprise that felt like a miracle arriving 18 months into their marriage, when they'd settled into contentment with their family of 5. Sierra's fertility specialist had warned them that success was unlikely, even with medical intervention, but somehow their daughter had defied statistics and medical predictions to announce her presence with morning sickness that lasted until well into the 2nd trimester. "I can't believe she's going to be here in 6 weeks," Dylan said, his voice carrying the same wonder that had characterized his reaction to the positive pregnancy test 4 months earlier. "I can't believe we're going to have 4 daughters," Sierra replied, though the prospect filled her with joy rather than terror. Poor Dylan surrounded by all that estrogen. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Dylan said, looking around the table at his 3 girls who were already planning their baby sister's introduction to everything they considered essential about family life. The conversation over dinner meandered through memories of the past 2 years, Sierra's adoption of the girls becoming legally final, Dylan's promotion to senior partner at his firm, the expansion of Sierra's non-profit into 3 additional school districts. But underneath the recitation of achievements and milestones ran the deeper satisfaction of a family that had weathered challenges together and emerged stronger. "Tell us the story again," Nova requested, as they shared dessert, referring to the family origin myth that had become essential bedtime entertainment. "About how you and Sierra met and fell in love." "You 3 tell it better than we do," Dylan replied with a smile. "You were the ones who orchestrated the whole thing." Once upon a time, Arya began with the dramatic flair that had characterized her storytelling. Since she could speak, there was a lonely daddy who worked too hard and never did anything fun for himself. And there was a lonely lady who helped other people's children because she thought she couldn't have any of her own. Nova continued her scientific mind appreciating the logical progression of their family's formation. And there were 3 little girls who loved their daddy so much that they decided to find him someone who would make him smile more. Luna finished her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose plan had exceeded all expectations. So they went to a restaurant where the daddy was supposed to meet the lady. Arya continued, and they talked to her first to make sure she was nice enough for their family. They asked her important questions. Nova added, like whether she liked dinosaurs, and whether she would stay even when things got complicated. And she said yes to both questions, Luna concluded triumphantly, so they knew she was perfect. Sierra listened to this familiar recitation with the same mixture of amusement and gratitude that it always evoked, marveling at how these 3 remarkable children had seen what she and Dylan couldn't, that they were meant to be a family that love could be chosen, rather than just stumbled into, that the best relationships were built from intention rather than accident. "What's the moral of the story?" Dylan asked, playing his assigned role in this family ritual. "The moral," all 3 girls said in unison, "is that families aren't just about being born together. They're about choosing to love each other every single day." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Sierra caught sight of their reflection in the front window, a family of 5 about to become 6, connected not by biology, but by daily acts of choice and commitment and love. Dylan with his arm around her shoulders. 3 girls clustered around them with the casual intimacy that spoke of absolute security. Her hand resting protectively over their unborn daughter, who would arrive into a family that already understood how to love unconditionally. "Ready to go home?" Dylan asked, using the word that encompassed everything they'd built together, not just the physical house they shared, but the emotional space, where all of them could be completely themselves without fear of abandonment or judgment. "Ready," Sierra replied, realizing that home wasn't a place but a collection of people who had decided that loving each other was worth whatever challenges might come. Walking out into the crisp evening air, Luna slipped her hand into Sierra's free one and looked up with the wisdom that only children possessed about the really important things in life. "Mom," Luna said, testing the word that had become as natural as breathing over the past 2 years, "are you happy we found you?" Sierra looked down at the little girl, who had been the first to call her Mom, who collected beautiful stones because she understood that ordinary things could be precious when viewed with love, who had somehow known from their first meeting that Sierra belonged in their family. "Luna, sweetheart." Sierra said, her voice thick with emotion that 2 years of security hadn't diminished. "You didn't find me. You saved me. All of you saved me." As they walked toward their car under a sky full of stars that seemed arranged specifically for this moment of perfect contentment, Sierra reflected on the journey that had brought them together. She'd thought her story ended with Marcus's abandonment and Dr. Chen's devastating diagnosis, but she'd been wrong. That hadn't been an ending, it had been a beginning, disguised as a tragedy, clearing space in her life for the family she never could have imagined, but always had been meant to love. Sometimes the worst days of our lives lead to the best ones, Sierra thought, remembering Dylan's words from their early courtship. Sometimes when we think we're at the end of our story, we're actually at the beginning of the most beautiful chapter we never saw coming. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, 3 determined little girls show up at exactly the right moment to remind us that love multiplies when shared, that families are built from choice rather than chance, and that the best surprises are the ones that transform our understanding of what's possible. "Friends," Sierra said softly, looking up at the stars that had witnessed their entire journey, "if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you that kindness matters and families come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the most beautiful love arrives in the most unexpected packages, remember that you're never truly alone. There are people out there waiting to choose you, just like you're waiting to choose them. She squeezed Luna's hand, adjusted her grip on Dylan's arm, and smiled at the two older girls who were already planning their baby sister's first Christmas, her first Easter, her first everything in a family that understood that love was a verb rather than just a feeling. In the distance, Rosewood Cafe glowed with warm light, ready for the next group of strangers who might become family. The next chapter of love that would begin with someone brave enough to believe that happy endings were possible for anyone willing to choose hope over fear. And in a house across town that waited for their return, 4 bedrooms held space for the family they'd built together. 3 girls who'd taught 2 adults that love could be chosen daily, and 1 baby girl who would arrive into a world where she was already beloved by siblings who couldn't wait to teach her that the best families were the ones you made rather than the ones you were given. The story that began with an empty restaurant table and 3 determined matchmakers would continue for decades to come. But this chapter, the one where broken hearts became whole, where strangers became family, where hope triumphed over fear, was complete. If this incredible journey of love, family, and second chances has touched your heart like it touched ours, don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button right now and join our community for more stories that will restore your faith in the power of human connection. Give this video a thumbs up if Sierra and Dylan's love story reminded you that sometimes our greatest blessings come in the most unexpected packages. And please share this with someone who needs to remember that families aren't just about biology. They're about choosing to love each other every single day, through every challenge, with open hearts and unwavering commitment. Let us know in the comments which part of this story moved you the most, and where in the world you're watching from. Remember, you're never truly alone. Your chosen family is out there waiting to find you, just like you're waiting to find them. Thanks for being part of our story-loving community, and we'll see you in the next heartwarming tale that proves love always finds a way.